Hey there, long time no see. Before we get started, real quick, I just want to tell you that if you enjoy content like this, you can support me on Patreon and reap the small benefits of early access, my Discord server, and more. If you're interested, I also have a sequel video on Super Smash Bros. Ultimate that I will make as a stretch goal for 100 snickerdoodles. But enough of this. Fans, friends, freaks, it's finally time to get back to our Lord and Savior. Sonic the Hedgehog, he who forever sparks boundless discussion. Now, just remember, my previous video was called Farewell Sonic Forever, with a question mark. The point of a video was not to say that I am permanently setting myself off limits from this series, but to illustrate the fact that I believe that the spirit of Sonic is gone, maybe never to return. It's no longer even the series I grew to love, but that sure got me thinking. What if it was? Now hold on. This is not a how to fix Sonic video come on, everyone's thought of that. No, we can do better. Frankly, in some form or fashion, many of the issues the series faces today can be traced back very, very far. I don't think even the most devout Sonic fanboy could deny that the current reputation of a series is born of a snowball effect where mistakes were made in a very unfortunate sequence, one after another, in one place or another. At some point, I believe, you feel the series was stronger than it was at another point, and it's certainly not in the natural sense that it would be for another big-name franchise. So why is that? Why is Sonic, a singular continuity video game series, so defined by generations and eras and all this crap? Could that have been avoided? I would say so. Today, I mainly want to look into the question of how could Sonic have successfully evolved? To do this, we're going to have to grab our imaginary time machine and go back. But where to? Okay, so we gotta establish some ground rules, lest I cause a time paradox, or a fit in the comments section. Rule 1. I will attempt to keep the artistic integrity of our timeline mostly intact. What I mean by this is that I'm going to try to have this hypothetical timeline still be recognizable as a reflection of our own. There's plenty of ideas as the series goes on, and I think it's only fair to the creative talent that I try to keep as many of them in as possible, with notable exceptions that I believe simply don't coexist in this scenario. Rule 2. This video is done through a lens of retrospect. Obviously, I have had time to sit here and reflect on each and every mistake Sonic has made, but a fresh Sega back then wouldn't. This is the nature of the video, and there's no changing that, so don't take it too seriously. Rule 3. I'm going to try to be realistic with my ideas. I understand that there's a lot on the business side of a coin that I just can't hope to comprehend, so I'm not exactly out to conceptualize a series that couldn't possibly have been achieved. I wish to try and convey what I believe the series could have realistically done while still being sustainable, backed up by evidence of what other properties were able to do. Rule 4. I'm strictly not going to be talking about Sonic the Hedgehog through Sonic Adventure 2. Because you think the adventure games are perfect. No, because the classic and adventure games are so heavily tied to Sega's console business that it is well beyond the scope of this video. And besides, I'm making some changes to other games that I really like, so don't get any ideas. Finally, Rule 5. Some things are going to have to be left a bit vague. You're gonna have to use your imagination, as I can't exactly make fan games to show you what I mean. I'm not a game designer, and I'm also not a fanfiction writer, although I probably could be. So I'm gonna throw ideas out onto the table and maybe give examples for why I think it could work, but I can't be too specific, and I just want you to be open, not take it too literally, try to have fun with it. With all that information in mind, let's close our eyes, hold hands, and blast through with Sonic speed. We're going back to Sonic Heroes. Sonic's first home console installment after Sonic Adventure 2 is seen by many people as the first crucial misstep the series took. If you know me, you'll know that I like this game quite a bit. I definitely do not agree that this game is garbage, or even responsible for the exact problems faced in later, more extreme examples. However, I definitely understand why it's not everyone's favorite, and it certainly marked a notable turning point in Sonic's history, irrelevant of its quality. So what do I believe the compromise could be that it may more unanimously be seen in a better light? Well, I think the absolute first order of business is that the game needs more time in the oven. By no means did Heroes start this. Sonic games have notably suffered from time constraints even as far back as the precious classics. However, being well past the advent of 3D and having more glaring jank than its older brethren, on top of its smaller scale, it's not hard to see why Sonic Heroes is the point where people grew a little less patient with this limitation. Unlike the prior two games, there was no Sega console to sell. They simply wanted to get new Sonic out onto their competitors' platforms as soon as possible so that they could get more stuff out onto those same platforms. This, in my opinion, is Heroes' crucial mistake. The game was released 2.5 years after Sonic Adventure 2, which itself released 2.5 years after Sonic Adventure. Sonic Heroes didn't have the clear serialized goal that SA2 did, and not only that, it was working with a new engine so that it could be programmed on every console. Every console, including the less powerful PS2, which was a juggernaut they couldn't deny. Needless to say, this was a challenging predicament. Now, I understand. Every game has a deadline to meet. Every company needs something to push itself through a fiscal year. But after you release overtly rushed games, time and time and time and time again, eventually your reputation falters to the point where you lose out on cumulative sales you could have otherwise had. If everyone thought Sonic was this awesome brand and they just had to get each new game, I don't think I even need to be in the business to know that'd be a better reality for all parties involved. Without a console to save, this refraining from riskily publishing games in hopes for instant gratification should have begun here. Sega can survive if Sonic Heroes comes out in late 2004 instead of 2003. There's more to this point, but I'll have to save that for a bit. Bottom line, don't rush games. Not everything can be done within a realistic time frame, but this is not okay. Alright, so we eliminated what I believe was the #1 issue with the game. Even one extra year of development can make a substantial difference, and I have no doubt in my mind that if this were the only change made, we'd be looking at a happier community. But as any mindful fan would know, glitches are not the only concern with Sonic the Hedgehog. So where did Sonic Heroes slip up at a fundamental stage?
It wasn't Sonic Adventure 3?
Not quite. What, would every 3D game going forward just be Sonic Adventure 3, 4, 5, and 6? What even defines Sonic Adventure past our given definition to it ever since they gradually stripped away its features? To be more to the point, Sonic Adventure 2 is already a pretty different game to Sonic Adventure 1. Way I see it, that title only needs to stand for those being the early 3D games. However, just because the games going forward aren't called Sonic Adventure, that doesn't mean they are any less follow-ups to the old Dreamcast duo. As such, I think the greater fanbase would prefer that this game controls more like the Sonic Adventure games. By all means, Sonic Heroes plays by the same rules as the adventure gameplay style, but the control itself is simply not comparable. Part of this may be due to the difficulties of time constraints, but another part actually does have to do with the game's design. The difference in movement between these formations makes it appear all too intentional that the speed characters take off at rocket speeds compared to their Dreamcast counterparts, because it's by design that you switch to the other two for slower segments. This is why one does not simply plop adventure control into these stages, because they plainly were designed with this breakneck speed in mind. I opine that this gear shifting control method is still fine, but clearly it's not ideal and we really don't need it. Instead, I think people would be a lot happier if the game were designed around each formation playing as they did in Sonic Adventure, but with some tweaks to account for the new team gameplay. Having equal and organic run speeds, but shining as individuals through their unique abilities. Flight would probably have to be nerfed so as to not be the dominant option, and I guess they have a good excuse to do so through this heavier totem formation. But this nerf would come naturally through a shorter distance rather than dropping you like a rock with a weird movement meter. Power characters would also receive some nerf from their adventure counterparts in that they can't climb walls. They can still glide farther than the fly formation can fly, but their verticality is limited by comparison. I think by swapping between these different forms of traversal, spin dashing, flying, or gliding, the player would be able to have a flow undreamt of in the previous games, or at least they will if they embrace the power of teamwork. Speaking of which, for our heroes to be teaming up, there's gotta be a greater threat that'd be difficult to take on alone. As such, I totally understand why more complex combat was integrated starting with this game. This will remain mostly the same in my timeline. Essentially, we're looking at a button layout like this to better convenience the player and make them feel in control of these unstoppable teams. No same button syndrome, no more Dreamcast shoulder button camera. What could be? Well, that about does it for Control, which I feel isn't too unfeasible at that time, but what else? Yes, the structure. Sonic Heroes is pretty unique in how it prioritizes story much less than its predecessors. This isn't inherently a problem, not at all. Well, I certainly don't think it's an inherent win either, but it can definitely work. This game is essentially structured exactly the same as Sonic Advance, which would be cool, except the game has more of an intertwining story to tell. It's actually like an awkward middle ground between adventure storytelling and the more bare stories of the Advance games. As such, the game feels conflicted with its own structure. Like, they designed the thing to be this easy, pick your favorite team and go save the world thing, but there's also a last story, which takes elements that you need to play the other campaigns to fully understand. If you don't care about the story, then there you go, you're good, but that's clearly not all they were attempting to achieve here. Since the story is not the one in the driver's seat, or even the passenger's seat, it has to try and get in whenever it can. The developers want there to be rival battles between teams, so we need to conjure up some reason for each conflict to happen. It's unorthodox, as I'm sure you know. I believe, from the very beginning, gameplay and story should be more hand in hand. Clearly, the producers or director, whoever, has a more lighthearted and simple idea they'd like to do for this title. But no matter how you slice it, context is what drives the player, and I think the one who's able to wield that context should not be involved after the fact. Having the gameplay work closer in tandem with the narrative would probably result in a structure that I think is more appropriate than mandatory difficulties. No Team Dark player wants to play the easy mode in order to get to the last story they're already capable of reaching. Likewise, no one who fancies Team Rose as their favorite characters wants to be talked down to. Difficulties should be optional. Instead, I don't know, maybe I'd suggest that the story mode is one continuous playthrough where you swap between contextually appropriate teams, and then perhaps you could freely use the teams in challenge mode, being able to enjoy very slight differences in gameplay and character interaction. I think that'd be more fun. Maybe in the main story, when the teams would intersect, you would choose which one you side with, kind of like Subspace Emissary. But you know, with there being one campaign as the focus, you could more carefully plot out scenarios to make things happen, like a 1v1 between Sonic and Neo Metal Sonic, or a reaction from the other characters to Shadow's return that isn't lame as fuck. This is the fairest compromise I can imagine while still retaining the upbeat spirit of a bunch of goobers going out to save the world. You want to play it like the classics, no cutscenes or greater understanding needed, feel free to hop straight into challenge mode. But as we are in 3D, like it or not, the story is more involved, so going forward, let's go ahead and lower the stakes as we see fit, but we don't need to kneecap creativity to do so. Also, hey, maybe don't include things like the real superpower of teamwork. The goal of this game was to attract new audiences, not drive away old ones. Now, from here, there's a lot of miscellaneous stuff to talk about, but that's nonetheless pretty important. The Sonic Adventure games, especially 2, are quite reputable for having a rather extensive amount of content divorced from the main story. It really made the games feel special and cutting edge. Even if the core game is notably weaker in certain areas than it should be, I think I'm safe in speaking for a lot of people when I say that it was so easy to love these games because of how immersed you could get in exploring their world and personality. Sonic Heroes, as we know it, is obviously smaller in scale, but I have given it praise for still attempting to give those who enjoy it stuff to sink their time into. However, it can definitely do better. Over time, the Sonic series would steadily have less and less meaningful content in each game, which is a really crummy feeling because it truly makes you feel like you're playing some dumb platformer for kids rather than the big, awesome new game. You sit there and you wonder, man, How on earth did we go from having all this to just this? I'm generalizing, of course, but you get the idea. In an ideal world, Sonic games would find the balance between having quality assurance and scale that's fully realized. Luckily, an ideal world is exactly what we're seeking here. However, nothing is won without sacrifice, and I say that for Sonic Heroes to be a more fulfilling experience, 2-player has to go. I get its inclusion, I admire it, I do, but frankly, it'd be better and more profitable to leave multiplayer to games based around it. That development time can be spent strengthening a great single-player experience, and once they're confident in that, perhaps we can see a nice gallery of goodies to unlock. Fun side missions, cosmetic skins, or even characters like in the battle mode of SA2, boss attack mode, you name it. Actually, since we're collecting the Chaos Emeralds like the good old days, how about super forms that you can activate within stages? And I mean real super forms, none of that dinky shield business. By the way, I'm vetoing the notion that only male hedgehogs can go super. I think that's stupid. Design super cream and cheese, you cowards. Oh yeah, so you know how super hard mode is the ultimate unlockable of our Sonic Heroes? That's kinda lame. I think after Green Hill and SA2, it should be law that each 3D game has some super cool secret at the end. What would that be here? Maybe you could mix and match teammates and have some kooky new dialogue or even some special team blasts. Yeah, that'd be pretty dang nifty. I don't know, there's a lot of fun stuff they could do. Point is, if the team can reasonably craft a polished, rad single-player experience, it'd be great if extra content would be a standard going forward as well. And like that, I think I have officially scraped the bottom of my Heroes barrel. The main takeaway here is that with more time and consideration, Sonic Heroes would hopefully be a multi-platform hit that introduces a bunch of new fans to all kinds of cool characters. For me, it already is, but I'm talking of bigger success. While Sega has unfortunately lost its place on the gaming totem pole, it would be able to use this new position to strengthen and broaden the appeal of its star IP. Sega may have lost to the console war, but Sonic's face is still everywhere Mario looks. Ooh, and if I may, as a fan of how Metal Sonic was portrayed in this game, I think it'd be really nice if at the end, Omega shot him into a million pieces. Now, I know that sounds weird, but it's to build character, because Metal Sonic would not fade into staleness as boring, silent spin-off fodder who follows Eggman's every command. Instead, it'd be cool to see him kinda become his own thing, having transferred his data into a new body in a post-credits scene like Ultron or Sigma. Okay, that's getting into the fanfiction territory, but I have good reason. To put it bluntly, Sonic characters in our world have descended into complete madness, with flanderization continuing for so long that some people are not even able to remember what the characters were like in the first place. Among examples of characters who regressed instead of growing or even remaining the same, Metal Sonic is one of the most underspoken. A shame, for I love him so. But nothing is more emblematic of how the series lost the plot than the decline of its second most popular character. For us to understand the gravity of this, we need to unlock the secrets of his past. How could Sonic Team have successfully released Shadow the Hedgehog? They don't release Shadow the Hedgehog. Wait a minute now, let me explain. Specifically, I do mean Sonic Team does not release Shadow the Hedgehog. Remember, Sonic Heroes has been delayed by at least a year, and the reason we can allow this is that Sonic Team isn't gunning to make another title on 6th-gen consoles right after it. Instead, when they're ready, they are dedicating themselves to the new AAA next-gen Sonic game. Think about it. The Sonic 06 that we know today had to have been worked on while the studio was working on Shadow, but surely work on Shadow began at some point while they were desperately trying to finish Heroes. Then, at some point in 06's development, team members were pulled to make a Wii version, which would eventually become Sonic and the Secret Rings. And perhaps that's only the tip of the iceberg. The major point being that all of these games suffered because of a compulsive drive to get to the next one. This does not happen. In this timeline, there's no such thing as a B-team mainstream Sonic game. And yes, I do consider Shadow, Secret Rings, and Black Knight main titles, because for all intents and purposes, those were your Sonic Team home console releases, irrelevant of subject matter. Need I also bring up that Sonic Team doesn't just work on these. They develop other Sega games, co-develop Sonic games that were outsourced, and then, on top of that, there's division within their solely fully developed Sonic titles. But I'm getting a little too far ahead. Back to Shadow, Sega can still use their resources to make this game, but I think the lead cook should stay in the high-definition kitchen. Imagine if Shadow the Hedgehog were outsourced to another studio and made into this, sick action game, clearly defined as a spin-off, free to be its own thing. Now that I think about it though, that does warrant more discussion. I did say that Shadow the Hedgehog could exist in this universe, however, as I just alluded to, it would not be recognizable as the same game. This is one of a few instances where I will look at a game in our timeline and definitively say, start over. From its very premise, our Shadow the Hedgehog promised to do one thing, and that is chase trends with great haste. It used Shadow's darker appearance and possible status as an android to completely jump the shark in a desperate attempt to hook in angsty kids. I'm not even someone who's against things like realistic guns, governments, or cities existing in this universe, but there's no reason for Shadow to come walking out with an AK-47 other than this. It's plainly shock value, and unfortunately, that's a key element of this game's identity. The choice between hero and villain doesn't work because following SA2, Shadow isn't meant to be a character of dubious morality. What a game about Shadow following Sonic heroes should be doing is explaining the business with Eggman and the Shadow androids while also going a step further to unlock even more secrets about Shadow's past than he was initially looking for. Answering questions such as, what was the Eclipse canon for? What's going on with Maria's alleged illness? Can we elaborate on details pertaining to the Ark incident? And well, certainly some of these questions were answered, but in the stupidest way possible. Ah, yes, of course. Shadow was made through Gerald's strange 50-year contract with an alien named Black Doom. Okay, focus. I'm not here to rail on the game, I'm here to convey that this forever ruined the perception of this character and more definitively stained the reputation of Sonic Team. We can sit here and debate on how good the game plays, I think, but it doesn't matter because what the game set out to do in the first place is absurd. I'm not trying to say it's objectively bad and that you can't like it, but in my hypothetical wonderland, Sega has the brand integrity to say, maybe we won't do this. So what happens instead? I don't know. I'm not going to delve too deep into it since it's no longer a main game and it'd be starting from scratch. However, there are some things that are all too relevant to the rest of the series that I will say. To begin with, and this truly seems like a no-brainer, Shadow the Hedgehog's plot should probably be written by the man who created him, or at least his original story, Shigeru Miyamoto. In fact, let's go back a bit further. This whole Shadow Android arc should have been planned better in advance. Perhaps it was. Perhaps Miyamoto always had an intended vision for where the character would go following Sonic Heroes. Regardless though, he's not the one who got to write that chapter, as he would instead be occupied with a later chapter. So what the fuck do we do? Well, I think here is where there truly should have been a concentrated effort to maintain the series' lore and continuity. Rather than playing musical chairs with writers, maybe there should have just been a dedicated team behind the creative decisions having to do with this universe. Even if someone new is taking the helm for a new project, or even if the producers mandate something entirely different, you'd have a council of individuals who truly understand the source material and try to make sense of it all. I'm not ignorant to the idea that perhaps this actually exists in our timeline, but if it does, could have fooled me. You need to keep that damn moon blown in half, or you will give a good reason why it's not. Sorry, this is what I mean. Synchronicity between the team to create a clear vision. That's all I'm asking. In this timeline, the series has mostly consistent lore and characterization, regardless of what kind of game they are making. Shigeru Miyamoto stays on as a creative supervisor since he's the closest we have at that point to a series writer, and Shadow gets a canon game on the side that nicely wraps up plot lines from his previous two appearances. Ooh, and what would be a really nice cherry on top would be improved localization, better conveying the true intention of the story while also forming figures of speech that will resonate easier with international speakers. It just puts a tear in my eye to dream of such uniformity. Speaking of which, I got one more piece of firewood to add to this pile of things that reached an ugly head around 2005. One that may not seem all too important, but in our world, plays an excellent role in dividing the fanbase like no other. The voice cast, a topic guaranteed to convince other internet dwellers that we Sonic fans are big losers because of how often we argue over idiosyncrasies within our cartoon animal voices. But why us? To illustrate the answer, let me just quickly pull up some comparisons I'm tired of hearing. The Sonic the Hedgehog video game characters and their accompanying voice actors are not the same as movie incarnations of, say, Spider-Man and his accompanying actors. No, modern Sonic is not the same as Mega Man X to his classic counterpart either. If you want to bring up other continuities such as the Deke cartoons, Sonic Boom, or the movie, sure, go right ahead. Those are quite the same as the many superhero continuities out there. But the very thing we are discussing each and every day, the video games, has been a single continuity spanning from 1991 to 2021. As such, when its cast of characters undergo changes even comparable to an entire continuity reboot, yeah, it's not exactly just Sonic fans up to their old tricks when they don't like it. Imagine if starting in Avengers Age of Ultron, every character were portrayed by a completely new actor, jarring enough for one or two characters, immersion destroying for all of them. Sure, that may be a bit extreme of an example, but it nonetheless is why the fandom reeks of forum gunpowder. This portrayal debate will happen already when it's about reboots, but when it's not, that just makes it even worse. I can't think of a single franchise that's gone on this long while having this exact problem, and for good reason. In my timeline, Sonic does not. What this means is that, true to their word, Sega does not interrupt voice consistency. Sonic X can go ahead and do whatever it's doing, I don't really care, but in the games, I decree that they do not have an arbitrary character recast. And before you come in and say, well, actually, I don't think Ryan Drummond was all that good, that's not the point. The point is that when you have a consistent cast and improve your voice direction over time, it's a lot easier to have your actors truly understand their character and kinda mold into the role. I won't make it a secret that I prefer most of the Adventure era actors, but it truly isn't about that. It's about the fact that in Japan, the voice actors have only ever changed when they absolutely needed to, on an individual basis to be more precise. And when they do, their replacement sounds remotely like the character as you knew them. We'll put it another way. While they have gotten tons of new voice actors over time, Bugs Bunny and Mickey Mouse still have a general iconic way they sound. Sonic, however, goes from sounding like this to sounding more like this to sounding like this. You can say it reflects the character getting older, but I'd prefer the character and his voice to actually get older. Also, by that logic, Rouge gets older with Kathleen Delaney and then younger with Karen Strassman. Yeah, no. In my timeline, we don't waste energy on Twitter debating whether or not certain voices match their characters. If an actor chooses to pursue other opportunities, cool. But you'd kinda trust that the localized version of that character wouldn't have their entire vibe changed quite like Vector the Crocodile did.
Find the computer room!
Wouldn't be one of my videos if it didn't have lengthy clarification for those in the back. But it's pretty important. I'm trying to get you into the world that I'm seeing. A world where we have interviews with those who have grown with almost the entire series just as we did, but as voices who have practically lived through every adventure. I understand how much some people love the new cast, but it's for the greater good. However, by that same merit of growth, the Sonic series has more to offer than just the signature action platformers. While it perhaps cannot match Mario's sheer accessibility and outreach, Sonic in our timeline definitely tried, especially once it stepped foot into its former rival's territory. This is good, as smaller or alternative releases ideally exist to sustain the gap between major releases. While its competitors are by no means perfect in the field either, I think most would agree that Sonic's lineup of miscellaneous content has not reached its full potential. So what needs to change in order for that to be more prevalent? Let's start with the fun fact that 2D Sonic never left. It's always had a moderate degree of success on Nintendo's handheld systems while being developed by Dimps. Even a lot of critical outlets will back that up. Be that as it may, Dimps kind of became a meme for the more diehard Sonic fan, and it's not quite unfounded. None of these games share the same scale of Sonic 3 and Knuckles, for one thing. For another, while the classics had quite a bit of dated design themselves, the Dimps titles are infamous for some pretty questionable decisions compounded by inherent screen crunch. It's for this reason that I suggest suggest even these titles receive some more time in the oven. More time to playtest, more time to create, more time to be true follow-ups to the games on the Genesis. The first Sonic Advance launched in December of 2001, very shortly after the handheld itself hit store shelves. A comfortable and safe way to ease Sonic into the greater gaming outback, but in retrospect, it mirrors Heroes in a way of desiring to quickly reach Nintendo's new toy and being limited by that fact. Of course, with this, they then would have more time to release as much content for the system as they can. Ideally, maybe Dimps doesn't create 3 Sonic games on the GBA. Maybe there's only 2, but they're considered like must-haves. Then perhaps they could spend more time on their upcoming DS project, not too dissimilar to the situation with Sonic Team and the 360. The goal is that 2D Sonic would continue to shine right next to its 3D brethren on the consoles that could so fittingly use it. Other side projects like Sonic Riders or Sonic Battle have the right idea, embracing Sonic's radical zeal to push new forms of entertainment and broaden its audience. These games have their share of issues from a design standpoint, but you know, as the first of their kind, being located at the tail end of their generations and not serving too relevant to the core chapters of this video, I think they can kinda work as is. The only real change I'd make is that perhaps Battle should be handled by someone else to make it a more legit fighting game. I don't know, Sonic Team lending their assistance with projects that were outsourced to other developers is a given, but the less they are distracted by single-handedly developing side projects, the better. Again, they're gonna need all hands on deck for their latest and greatest creation. After Sonic's sparkling, colorful debut with its new partners, a new challenge still lies on the horizon. This time, speed won't be enough. Ooh, what a theme. A game that needs no introduction, Sonic the Hedgehog. Okay, right away, I don't think that title was a good idea. I totally understand and respect the intention. The thought process behind it was that this game would be such a leap, the absolute next level, that a title boldly proclaiming it as the definitive Sonic the Hedgehog experience was appropriate. But 1, it obviously doesn't carry the same weight if the game is anything but the greatest game in the series, and 2, even if the game did live up to expectations, it's just confusing. If the game doesn't really center around a gimmick, if the game is purely marketed as Evolution Incarnate, hey, yeah, how about that title? Sonic Evolution, the ultimate video game experience. By the way, because I know it's gonna get brought up, I'm just throwing it out there that Sonic 06 being intended as a canonical reboot is a certified myth from the comments section. There's absolutely no proof for this other than dumb inconsistencies within the story itself and a misunderstanding of a given reason behind the title. If it were truly intended as a story reboot, then it's a fundamental catastrophe because we're plopped into a world with a few backstory-heavy characters that have no backstory. What's even the point of it being a reboot if we're just supposed to assume the backstories are mostly the same? If anything, Shadow's newfound peace with a gun lends itself more to the idea that, indeed, it follows up on the previous titles. See, this is what I'm talking about. That name just leads to trouble. It also, in my opinion, distracts from the core themes of our playable trio in favor of leading you to assume this is some game centralized around Sonic's character. True story about me when I was a kid. After Shadow the Hedgehog, I took one look at the cover and actually expected this to be like a prequel having to do with Sonic's origins or some shit. I'll go ahead and keep referring to it as Sonic 06 throughout the video since that's just what we all know it as, but I figured I'd mention it. Now anyway, regarding the fix with this one, we've already kind of delved into the most important part. Say it with me now, taking time. In our reality, Sonic 06 reportedly began development around 2004, and I assume the same would happen here once Sonic Heroes is nearing completion. But again, this time there's no Shadow the Hedgehog for Sonic Team to occupy themselves with. What's more is that the adherence to anniversary years is more detrimental than it is special. Yeah, there's also the holiday season, but why not the holiday season next year, if need be? Oh right, we gotta strike the HD iron while it's hot. Trust me, I don't don't think any sane person over the age of 12 is going to be upset to call it Sonic 07. With less constrained staff and more time to get everything organized, we're already looking at a much different game. Oh, and before anybody tries to go and say that this game was destined to fail and that no additional development time could help it, I just want to let you know that Sonic Adventure 2 underwent some pretty large changes in both conceptual and development stages. Glitches aren't the only things that can change through giving the team more time to consult each other and figure out if certain things are going to work. So let's imagine the full extent of what that may entail. Or perhaps I don't have to just imagine. Normally I'd see it proper to begin with stuff that would be decided from an earlier conceptual level, but I just can't go any longer without first mentioning a vital piece in this puzzle. That of course is Project 06, a fan-made recreation of Sonic's next-gen blunder that takes its core values and improves upon them. At the time of this video, it has remarkably worked up to its Shadow release, giving us a totally fresh, updated experience with all of Sonic and Shadow's levels from the original game. Chaos X, and anyone else involved, if you're watching this, I want you to know that your work has really inspired me and a lot of other people out there. Part of a drive to do this exact video was, in fact, all the content I've seen from you over the past 2 years, not even just P06. The Sonic series has so much to offer, so much potential, and I know that people like you are the reason why some of the rest of us don't just give up and stop paying attention to what good there can be. Thank you so much for your passionate contribution to the community, and thank you very much for essentially giving me a shortcut through this script. How should the gameplay of Sonic 06 be changed in retrospect? You know, just make it play like B06. Yes, I know, a finished 06 probably would not exactly be like this fan recreation. You know what I mean. After all, it takes so much from the adventure games and is even dedicated to fully realizing cut concepts found in the data of the actual game that I'm to believe most of these choices could have eventually made their way into the official product. Hey, if 1 or 2 people can do it, a whole team of paid staff is capable as well. At the risk of dating this video, I look forward to future releases and hope they further reflect Sonic Team's original ambitions to deliver a truly significant piece of art. Now, unfortunately, P06 won't be able to address everything about this game, I think, but what it can do, what it means in the greater picture, is why I find it so stand out. P06 proves the validity of Sonic Team's basic idea from a gameplay standpoint. Essentially, the Sonic Adventure games if you made the other playstyles closer in spirit to the Sonic and Shadow stages. I love Sonic Adventure 2 and have stated in the past that I wouldn't desire to rid it of its multi-character theming. But surely there's a more ideal compromise between having that spicy, colorful variety and also more consistently having the high points of controlling a Sonic character. This, in essence, is that compromise. So with how it appears that 06 would be an unconditional improvement to the 3D Sonic DNA, you would imagine that the rest of the game is crafted with the same vigor. From its initial reveal at E3 2005, the new Sonic the Hedgehog promised a mind-blowing jump to realism that was just not possible in any previous installment. From an environmental standpoint, the adventure games procedurally drew more and more from the real world, so it would make sense to bring that to its peak on the new hardware. I think this is incredibly admirable, and I would say that the environments present in the final build aren't too shabby for an early 360 game. Frankly, I don't understand the notion that Sonic can't have both regular cities and checkerboarded hills. Like, what about that is geographically not possible? If it's about more realistic landscapes being boring, nah, 06 has got you covered with exploding buildings and mysterious windy castles. But I will concede that they may have gone too far in a few places. You want to hear a hot take? I don't think the problem with this scene is the fact that a human is kissing an anthro hedgehog. I think the problem, well, okay, 1, it's that she's kissing a corpse, and 2, it's that she's like a real human, and he's like a somewhat lankier scrimblow bimblow. Interspecies relationships aren't exactly an unheard of thing in other media. Sometimes with different contexts, sure, but let's not pretend that Elise has the hots for a real animal, okay? Whether you're furry or not, I mean, look, Sonic's got human rights too, you know? Okay, this is getting pretty awkward. My point is that I am 100% positive that the reaction to this scene would not be nearly as horrific if the humans in this game didn't look so jarring next to these slightly more realistic cartoon characters. No one's really bent out of shape over Sarah from the Sonic OVA, right? It's all about presentation. Why is Shadow just taller and more detailed while Dr. Eggman looks like a fucking actor playing him in a live-action movie? Wow, that's actually quite accurate now. The humans in previous games have been variable in appearance, but I don't think they pushed the realistic barrier quite like these ones have. In Shadow the Hedgehog, the president looks kinda goofy, not too unlike fellow human Dr. Eggman. The way I see it, just handle the humans as you do the Mobians, or whatever they're called. Update them to be more refined for this new immersive world, but we don't need hyper-realism that will inevitably date itself anyway. Naturally, with the team's intention to evolve Sonic gameplay, graphics, and even the world itself, the story would be a major focus as well. Yuji Naka had once said, when Marvel or DC Comics turn their characters into films, they are thinking of them as blockbusters, huge hits, and that's what we were trying to emulate with Sonic 2006. Certainly, the game would launch with a number of really impressive cinematic cutscenes. The result outside of these, however, was lacking to say the least. Still, there's an important takeaway from these more crude events. I think the story of Sonic Adventure 2, especially for its time, was really epic and unprecedented for a platforming game. But its biggest issue, I find, is the rushed pacing. Certain details aren't quite as clear as they are intended to be, and wouldn't you know it, the writer himself feels that there were some pretty integral scenes that had to be cut for time constraints. Sonic 06, however, is loaded with cutscenes, most of which are very open to slow things down and have deeper moments to relate to with its characters. Shiro Maikawa returned to write for this game, and he was given instructions to make this story the next SA2, but now ascending the stakes towards time travel with the new character, Silver the Hedgehog. All the cards were laid on the table for it to work, but we know that generally this story isn't quite fondly remembered. So, what happened? The exact details aren't really known, but I can assure you that it is not some rhetoric about how serious storytelling can't work in Sonic. Especially if you put stock into the idea that they saw this as if it were a superhero movie. What I believe went wrong is simply that the game was so rushed that they didn't even have time to iron things out within the basic scenario. From a design standpoint, you're looking at what we know as a 2-year development cycle, while also juggling other projects, while also working to meet the standards of a new revolutionary console. There's no time to waste here, so much like Heroes, there simply is no waiting for the story to base our game around. Furthermore, this story isn't strictly by Maikawa's hand, as he is only credited towards the game's script. Likely, more so than even the previous games, most of the key plot elements had to be guided by the director Shun Nakamura, so that they could immediately begin working on all the hard material surrounding it. This leaves the other writers to try and tie up the threads that bind these elements together, and indeed, we're left with a messy puzzle. I'm sorry, I'm making this video more of a developer history lesson than a magical what-if scenario, but I think it's important to understand why all this stuff happened, and it's doubly important to understand how close to greatness they truly were. There are some absolutely talented people working at Sonic Team, making this game, and is it naive of me to believe that giving these people breathable work conditions would do more profitable good than harm? I don't think so. Suffice it to say that one extra year of development time doesn't go at the end, it goes at the beginning. Sonic Team has time to coalesce and devise a vision that will make a healthy, happy environment for the consumer and artist. Yes, that sounds nice, but what does it look like? I did say I would not subject you to straight up literature, and unfortunately, 06 is quite the complicated beast to give vague statements about. It's not exactly a storyline to start entirely from scratch like Shadow the Hedgehog, it's more of a somebody needs to peer review this like a few times kind of deal. So I guess I can only give examples of what that could look like. Starting with the time travel. Time travel stories by their nature are incredibly difficult to do, which is probably why I love them a lot. Putting a time travel story on top of an already existing franchise, however, oh, what a challenge. This was way too large an undertaking to be done with the time given, and it clearly shows. There are plot holes, continuity wrecks, and frankly dumb character decisions all over the place thanks to the approach of, don't worry about it when it comes to this time travel. Now, I think inevitably there's no such thing as a spotless time travel plot, as such a concept lies beyond our current comprehension, but you need to at least attempt to have solid rules and limitations. Having 2 Chaos Emeralds be capable of granting time travel, even if requiring 2 users, is a bad idea for reasons I'm sure you can guess. And I mean, come on, whatever happened to the time stones? Well, okay, let's assume those babies are gone because Little Planet flew away. You know what other means of time travel exists in this game?
Mephiles.
That's right, the mind of Solaris himself, seeking to reunite with the powerful body of Iblis. I really like how this game sees our 3 protagonists each fight their own bad guy, yet this brilliant concept doesn't really stick the landing. Mephiles is a character who can apparently fly through time whenever the fuck he wants, and he's quite memorable for how he manipulates people, but there's no logic, no rhyme or reason to it. There's never a given reason for most things having to do with this character or his ascended form. Why he can't just make Elise cry himself, why he can't just time travel to the point where Iblis is awakened, why he can't just fuse with Iblis in the future, why he even wants to do any of this. So here's my idea. Maybe Mephiles should quite literally be the devil on your shoulder, a being who can be anywhere but has no physical form and needs to manipulate other people to get things done. Perhaps in the first place, he tips Dr. Eggman off to try and unlock the flames of disaster hidden latent in Princess Elise, who probably shouldn't be able to release Iblis by crying because that's stupid. Perhaps time travel is able to be achieved because Mephiles guides Eggman to recreate the Solaris project, be it imperfect because it's missing the other half of the puzzle. Maybe Solaris began as a humble flame that kept temporal peace, but begins a rebellious campaign to rewrite history upon being misused by humans. Although, maybe that's a little too similar to the adventure games. I don't know, I guess I just have a lot of ideas for how this story could work. It'd be a fascinating tale where our favorite characters come together and use their power to defeat the impossible forces of godhood. We'd also probably get a more logical inclusion for characters like Knuckles or especially Blaze. Perhaps in this timeline, Sonic Rush isn't even out yet and this character is just like her pal Silver, made for both this game and a new 2D game. Maybe then they could actually lean into the idea of this title preceding the events of Sonic Rush. Then that leads into the question of, well, Jeb, what does any of this matter if it gets undone in the end? But that's kinda the intended point of the story. All the characters went on this massive, compelling journey with fun, personalized moments. Sonic teaches a sheltered and unhappy princess the joys of living life to the fullest and fighting for what you believe in, with no romantic undertones on Sonic's end, may I add. So by the end, when the only way to ensure the safety of the universe is to blow out the flame of Solaris, it's actually a sad moment, because you did have such a great time on this adventure. Such is the way of time, it can't coexist with Solaris. Plainly, that's only the cherry on top when it comes to this game. There's so much that goes into it, so much cut content like a music player or Metal Sonic. The more I sit here and write about this game, the more I truly feel like it could have been the greatest one yet. And that's what makes it so unfortunate as perhaps the most damaging point in the series' history. Well, one of them. It wasn't inherently a mistake, but that doesn't really matter. What matters, or what mattered, was the abysmally low critic scores. Sonic 06 in our timeline is a complete joke that only told Sega, oh shit, we gotta get away from this. There's a lot that goes into the notoriety of Sonic 06 beyond how it plays. Things that would forever be remembered as examples of what not to do with this series. Things that would lay a stigma upon certain aspects of all these games up to this point. Things that would be overcorrected so much over time that the series is practically unrecognizable from itself. Yes, it's no secret that I'm quite fatigued with the nuanceless discussion formed around this game each and every single day. Perhaps Sonic 06 is actually able to realize its vision, and even then, it's not perfect. Possibly, it still has long load times or shitty town missions or something. It's not an untouchable masterpiece that will never be topped. It's not getting a 99 on Metacritic. Maybe. But I don't know who's arguing that such a thing is the only alternative to what we have today. It may be definitively titled Sonic the Hedgehog, or even my suggested name of Sonic Evolution, but should it not reach this unsurpassable standard, that's okay. True evolution does not stop until the subject is done. Now thus far, I've mostly been looking into the question of how can we make this better for each given entry, which I'm sure a lot of people could probably answer the same way. So I apologize if you've already sunk into your chair out of boredom, but it's all necessary subtext. 2006 marked the end of Yuji Naka's run at Sonic Team, and I would be inclined to say that even with the difficulties down the road, there truly was an ever-evolving series going on at this time. If 06 is a critical success, we are now officially heading into true Timeline B territory. Does a better work environment prompt Yuji Naka to stay? Were there inevitable issues under his leadership that may have already propped up? I don't know. I'm gonna try to ignore anything having to do with individuals within the company going forward, but it is worth considering how the team's structure may have been quite different. To be honest, I could just end the video here, as there's no point in even discussing the radically different reality we'd be looking at. But nah, that's boring. I want to try and piece together a Timeline AB. What would change about many of the same decisions made in Timeline A? I don't think such a question is exactly unnatural. After all, we can deduce that they were at very least planning the basic building blocks of their next big step during the production of 06. As we know from earlier though, planning wasn't all they were doing. Remember, there was a game in production which specifically required the team to be cut in half. I am of course talking about Sonic and the Secret Rings. The very existence of this game hinges on the fact that, when presented with development kits, Sega wanted a Sonic release on the Nintendo Wii as soon as possible. It would literally take longer to make a version of 06 for it, so a smaller scale, on-rails game was invented to satiate the evidently huge crowd Nintendo accumulated with the Wii. I'm noticing a pattern. Sonic Heroes is given just barely enough time to act as Sonic's multi-plat debut. Sonic 06 needs to come out pretty damn close to that 360 launch. And of course, when Nintendo releases a goldmine of a new console, we just have to get in on that action right away, no matter the cost. One could argue that maybe it had to be done this way following the losses Sega endured during the Dreamcast era, but by 2006, this really could have been a chance to turn things around after accruing a steady fanbase on other consoles. Needless to say, in retrospect, I would not have Sonic Team split up to make Secret Rings. I won't deny the storybook games the right to exist, as I think they have plenty of creative ideas to value, but if they do exist, once again, it's spin-off material that is not strictly by the hand of Sonic Team. These should be fun adventures that are not quite as big as what you get on the new, powerful systems, but are still really enjoyable games to blast through on Nintendo's weaker hardware. They would be given more time if necessary, as after all, these are what people will be playing next to their copies of Super Mario Galaxy. One thing I should note, however, is that Secret Rings might be as awkward as it is because of its own inner divide between the main game and Party Mode. Yeah, they elected to go and make some sort of Mario Party-esque game mode to really make the fullest of the Wii's motion capabilities. As I'm sure you can imagine, both this and the main campaign kinda suffer as a result, even though it was definitely cool to have these things on one disc as a kid. I believe that if one of these things were cut, the game would not be quite as janky on either end, and may actually have been able to be realized within its incredibly short dev time. This is why the multiplayer of Black Knight is kind of weak sauce in comparison to Secret Rings' more unpolished, yet fleshed out party mode. Such was a necessary sacrifice in order to produce far more stages, cutting out that unclear filler nonsense. Though, the topic does warrant a point that I think is very important to Sonic's longevity. With the evolution to the next generation, furthering Sonic's reach to other genres seemed like a tantalizing thought to make good on. We would get more Dimps games, we would get a Riders sequel, we would get an RPG, and yes, we would get some Olympic crossovers with Mario. This kind of stuff really helped keep Sonic afloat during all the bad shit that was going on with the critics and management. It was definitely a fine safety net. But I'm not concerned with fine. The unfortunate reality of our timeline is that a lot of these different spin-off branches would eventually fizzle out for one reason or another. This was not preordained. Sonic Riders Zero Gravity was most likely not given a lot of time, and thus the improvement over the original became an overcorrection that made it absurdly basic. Then what they decided to do was use Sonic Riders to hop right on that new Kinect thing. After this, Sonic Riders was never seen again. Sonic Chronicles v Dark Brotherhood was a very interesting RPG from BioWare that had a lot of care put into its ties with the series lore. It truly did feel like there was some passion to create something big here, but again, not nearly enough time was given to this team, which was already quite busy as it is. This time, even the music was affected. We never saw Sonic RPGs ever again. Sonic Rivals was the immediate follow-up to 06, at least where the character of Silver the Hedgehog was concerned. But of course, it was made on the quick and on the cheap, so we could squeeze in a Sonic Rivals 2. And so that's basically it. Silver becomes a lame background character, never really given a great chance to shine, because his reintroduction was in low-budget PSP games. I'm sure you can guess what I'd change about this picture, but the magnitude of this fact needs to be spoken. I see a timeline where we still have dedicated Sonic Party games after the failure of Shuffle. What better way to make use of that Wii Remote? I see a timeline where we still have Sonic RPGs, even if a Dark Brotherhood isn't the greatest. One where Riders is our premier racing game series, providing a slick alternative to that standard Mario Kart. Oh, you know what? Maybe Sonic is such a big name that the party game series could actually be Sonic at the Olympic Games, since after all, they want to use that license to the fullest. It sounds crazy, I know, but it's just the kind of shenanigans that could work. Because after all, on top of all that, how could it get any cooler than having a 100% focused, real, genuine crossover game between Mario and Sonic? Yes, I did say I'd be realistic. I realistically think that provided some less hasty decisions, this could come to fruition. When you don't throw your ideas into the trash the moment they don't exactly work the way you want them to, the sky's the limit, really. If the Sonic brand were something that general gaming populace could still see value in, that could naturally lead to a dramatically different outlook on even the dumb gimmick games released on the Nintendo systems. The change in attitude following 06, well, you could even say that the difference would be night and day. Sonic Unleashed. What was a game meant to provide a fresh break away from the multi-layered drama of Sonic 06, you'd first ask if it even truly exists in this timeline at all. It's easy to look at the game and see it as a direct response, with a much simpler story that has more comedic writing than usual, a focus on Sonic as the only playable character, and a new style of gameplay that rocks the fundamentals of 3D Sonic on a level unlike those before it. However, regardless of the fact that I enjoy this game, I have good reason to believe something like it may have existed even with the success of 06. It's not often spoken about, but Unleashed was directed by someone new, Yoshihisa Hashimoto, previously well known for being the lead Chao Garden programmer. If you can believe it, the raw development of this game dates back to a few people developing the Hedgehog engine in 2005. After about a year of doing that, conceptualization for a Sonic Adventure 3 began. Of course, I don't really know what that means if 06 isn't Adventure 3, but I digress. The game would gradually be envisioned as a solo adventure focusing on Sonic traveling the entire world, designed as a pure, legitimate evolution. At some point, however, an order was given to include a stimulating element, to which the idea instantly popped up. What if we transformed Sonic into something wild? Thus, Sonic the Werehog was born. And you know, I don't think there's inherently a problem with this transformation. It's just the unfortunate truth that directly after 06, this was not the thing that would win people over, certainly. It looked as though they really ran out of ideas and were jumping the shark in a desperate attempt to achieve something. Evidently, they knew this would be controversial, but they went about doing it anyway. So, the question is, how do the merits of this game fit into my revised timeline? I would first like to say that, as a multi-character connoisseur myself, I'm not opposed to having a Sonic-only game directly after even a good 06. Sure, it'd probably be more jarring to delete all of your other characters in a world where people aren't constantly clamoring for them to go away, but some shakeup like this would be inevitable had we continued on that course. If 06 were genuinely considered like the peak 3D Sonic, I imagine that they'd take a similar approach that Ratchet & Clank did after its top installments. Because how many times will we do 06 but another one? The word experimentation has a really bad connotation in the Sonic community, because Sonic Team is anything but subtle with it. Yet, I think such a thing is kinda necessary for a series as long-running as this one. It's not to say that they literally expect team gameplay or the werehog or anything like that to stick around, but it's the way Sonic doesn't become stale. If executed better, I don't think most would disagree. What I care about is that the series has a consistent growth and identity, but that also means having a great deal of confidence and belief in each new project. The belief in making a game that would focus primarily on one character and yet be as big as its predecessor is admirable. It's much akin to Heroes and how, sure, I don't want every game to be like it, but then again, I don't want every game to be exactly the same as anything. It's about finding the middle ground between creativity and identity. With that in mind, yes, my Sonic Unleashed still centers around Sonic. And I mean, there are pros to doing this even outside of getting away from 06 territory. One of my favorite things about Unleashed is the friendship between Sonic and Chip. You're able to feel truly immersed in this globe-trotting extravaganza because of how connected you are to these two wide-eyed goobers. This is especially apparent in those unlockable CG scenes where they're fucking around in different places of the world, enjoying the sights and cultures of each land. It's a feeling that the multi-story approach to previous games just wouldn't have been able to capture. On the gameplay side of a coin, focusing exclusively on two playstyles means you're able to spend more time curating set pieces for these levels, which I think was also pretty evident in the final product with some of the most organic stages we've seen yet. But I'm losing focus. I still haven't actually said what changes. Yes. Okay. Alright, here we go. The boost formula is never introduced. No. We're not starting any of that "you're making a biased adventure circle jerk" nonsense today. No. Were I truly so inclined to protect the precious adventure lineage, then Unleashed would not be standing here. I already told you that I'm not here to say the series should have just been adventure all the way, especially because that's loosely defined as is. I am here to tell you that the series and its fans being defined by formulas and eras and all this shit is stupid and definitely self-inflicted. If your gut reaction is to say I am romanticizing the era I grew up with, do remember that I was still a kid when these boost games were coming out, and also remember that I enjoy Unleashed and especially enjoy Generations. Nevertheless, you must see that what I desire is no classic Sonic, adventure Sonic, boost Sonic, parkour Sonic. No! Don't you see? I'm trying to say that adventure isn't even a classification to think of. What I wish for is simply 3D Sonic and 2D Sonic. I suppose for some, it'd beg the question of what makes daytime boost Sonic antithetical towards the greater 3D series, since after all, it's meant to be a new step, a new evolution, and it absolutely is in terms of the speed and energy exhibited. However, it's not simply adding to what existed prior, hence why it's even described as a separate gameplay style. Camera control basically becomes obsolete because the instantly fly forward button mandates a more linear approach to level design. Any semblance of momentum-based control, which would have grown more and more accurate as the series went on, that also is kind of neutered when the game is so focused on blasting through at F-Zero speeds with the push of a button. This is why a lot of people say Sonic controls more like a car than a character now. Combat literally can't be anything more than just ramming through or homing attacking enemies, which I'll get back to in a sec. And then, of course, the most contentious factor of it comes in the form of 2D sections. Even as far back as Sonic Adventure, there has been compromise in creating 3D Sonic stages. In that game, they made about 10 of them and realized that the game would be incredibly short if it were simply focused on Sonic going through these levels. It took so much work to craft environments that Sonic could race through in 5 minutes. So this is why they use the same environments and make tweaks to extend the game with other characters instead. In Adventure 2, the levels are discernibly less open and less organic, placing far more emphasis on action and gameplay than the scenic worlds of Adventure 1. This, in combination with reusing assets, allowed them to create 30 stages. But again, Sonic and Shadow were only a portion of that. Their stages, on a technical merit, are the largest ones and also the ones easiest to mess up given their unconventional speed. Fast forward to Unleashed, and we've reached the boiling point of this problem. These levels have to be even larger thanks to the boost gameplay, never mind the additional details of an HD system, and thus, an easy way to make sure they don't end in 1 minute is to load them up with 2D sections that are much simpler to develop and will force Sonic to slow down. However, even with that, and even if they dedicated all that development time to just regular Sonic, the game would be far too short. This is why no boost game exists without a gimmick, and even then, the length of these games following Unleashed is, well, you know. I don't think it is unreasonable to say that the boost is an inhibiting factor in the development of Sonic games, even surpassing usual 3D Sonic troubles. But by all means, I wouldn't displace everything about the day stages in Unleashed. The quick step is something that I think would actually work pretty well even for adventure gameplay, intended as a way to keep the player active during straightway segments. The wall jump is an excellent idea that could pave the way for some really incredible runs, adding to the frantic flow of dashing through these lifelike places. And you know what? Maybe some compromise can be reached, having those super speed sections from 06 act as tailor-made boost segments, where you get to live out a section not unlike the gorgeous intro cutscene. After all, within our own boost formula, it's only select portions of a level that truly allow you this pleasure anyway. With extra development time and resources, I think it may be possible. But oh man, let's not keep the star of a show waiting, or should I say, the star's darker self. Daytime Sonic may be half of the overall picture in theory, but in actuality, it's still less than that. Why does the Werehog take up so much gameplay time by comparison? It's because it's literally easier to make long levels around a slow character than shorter levels around a fast one. I don't think I need to tell you that the Werehog is quite famous for being one of the most out-of-place gameplay styles in a Sonic game. Were this hack and slash gameplay integrated into a previous game, it may have felt more at home, but in the game where you're genuinely moving at Mach speeds all day, it's symbolically clashing at night. So if I don't believe the Werehog is inherently a bad idea, what alternative is there for its gameplay? Well, you see, one of the fundamental ideas they had when making an opposite form of Sonic was that he would literally skip leg day. By that I mean, what power Sonic has during the day with his legs would go straight up to his arms at night. Now, if Sonic isn't boosting in my game here, that means we're following more closely as an evolution from 06. If that were the case, the Werehog, instead of becoming an entirely separate genre to work those new muscles, would simply be another extension of Sonic-like gameplay. At night, Sonic will still be able to run fast using his huge arms to propel himself like a wild beast. However, on surface level, he can't go as fast because he can't spin dash. Instead, we'll expand on a page found within the Retail Unleashed. Sonic will be able to use his stretchy, powerful arms to swing to and fro across the map at dangerous velocity. This hulking monster will be tearing his way through cityscapes at night with free reign to grapple onto most surfaces rather than the limited poles found in our game. Another benefit to having this slower pace on the daytime spectrum is that you'd be able to do more level-specific things without it feeling like a screeching halt to your maniacal dashing. Henceforth, the same would be true at night. You'd be able to use the Werehog's strength to do fun things relating to the environments you're in. Basically, it would feel like a true alternate Sonic, having abilities comparable to the daytime counterpart in function. For example, instead of having a bounce attack like normal, the Werehog will have a stomp move with his spiky cleats.
Cleats?
Yes, I suppose that's a good segue into combat, as I'm sure that would would inevitably be part of this unleashed identity. Light combat from Heroes and 06 would be in this game too, instead of the unnecessarily extensive combat the Werehog is known for. Not only that, but it would be yet another showcase of Sonic's strengths and weaknesses depending on the time of day. You ever think it's shitty that the Werehog is supposed to exude sheer power, yet he has to sit there and wail on some of the same enemies that he would effortlessly blow through if the sun was up? That's not how it should be. Instead, while Sonic would probably be faster overall during the day, he would have to take things a bit more carefully if he wanted to make it through multiple enemies. When the moon rises, though, it's a completely different story. Sonic would deal far more devastating blows and create areas of carnage like nobody's business, similar to the power characters from Heroes, you see. This mindset can extend to action sequences meant to mirror the daytime boost sections, and even bosses, which I think R Unleashed demonstrates a bit of already. You know, I would even allow them to keep the RPG-ish level up system, as I can actually see that coming into play for our later installments coming up here. Either way, this gameplay loop would ideally be a somewhat simple and refreshing evolution from what we saw previously. Maybe through this more balanced game design and, as usual, more time and planning, we wouldn't even need to pad this game out beyond breaks in the hub world. On the subject of padding, we're not just talking about the massive disparity between the length of the two gameplay styles. We're talking about medal collecting, perhaps the single most blatant form of stretching the game out yet seen in the Sonic series. Cut that shit. Sun and Moon medals instead unlock cool optional content like the emblems would in previous games. And that optional content is not things we should have by default, like the ability to rewatch cutscenes. Jeez. Tornado defense also could at very least be more interesting, because otherwise it kinda does feel like yet another thing they tacked on just to increase the length a little bit more. Honestly, I don't see the need, as even without these things, the game is already long enough. It's now bloated to the point of being too long. Since we're talking about other stuff, you know, the smaller details, I got a few other things to suggest. I don't really have much of anything I'd change about the story. I think it's a fine, well-spirited adventure. Maybe a little bit too silly in certain intervals. Tails and Eggman are starting to transition into lamehood, yet it's still effective for what it's trying to do. But since this is a world where 06 was good and Sonic's stupid friends aren't widely considered stupid, I think it'd be really swell to see them at various points throughout the game. They wouldn't really be relevant to the story, they would indeed be background characters, but I mean, it would make sense given the fact that they aren't all going to be following Sonic around the world. It's a sense of keeping scale and continuity in mind that I really appreciate, as I do think it would be appropriate to know that Team Dark is separately working with Gun to provide aid during this dangerous crisis, or that Knuckles is guarding his island like a fucking hawk. I don't know, just cute stuff like that. I think Amy's minuscule inclusion is a notable example of this, where she happens to meet Sonic in his Werehog state and doesn't even recognize him. This fact surprisingly really bums him out, and I thought it was a very charming interaction. Not all of them would even need a cutscene like this, but it'd be a nice touch. They could even be part of side quests in the overworld or something. On that note, since the previous two Sonic games would feature super forms as one of the many unlockables, I wonder what this game would have. After all, I don't see the Werehog being able to achieve a super state, what with his negative energy and all, and the whole point of a game is to leave the Chaos Emeralds in each Gaia temple until the very end where they all come together. In-stage super transformations just don't seem appropriate, and so I think it'd be really exciting to embrace the Dragon Ball and give Sonic some exclusive forms for this game. To demonstrate, I give you Light Sonic and Dark Sonic. Yes, we're ignoring that one. Forms achieved by fully tapping into the powers of Light and Dark Gaia. You'd probably unlock these after the cutscene where Chip reveals his true identity. These are not as powerful as Super Sonic, leaving that form for the final boss fight, but they'd hopefully be just as cool to use in-game, especially as you raid Eggman's ultimate lair. Yeah, I know, it's kinda out there, but I figured it would be appropriate for the game known as Sonic Unleashed. That's probably a good final note to end on with this game. Given how much I spoke about the changes I would make, it may seem as though I really dislike Sonic Unleashed, but that couldn't be further from the truth. It's simply about keeping it in the spirit of this timeline while still using its many, many great ideas. Trust me, if I were going back to the adventure games, I would have similar pieces to give on them as well. Unleashed is a very special case because it is a full-scale title following the incident of 2006. games. Naturally, it is responsible for certain foundations which would gradually take control as the series moved onward. And while I do not blame this game for any issues in that regard, it nonetheless is the origin point. Well, sort of. That's why it's important to discuss these changes here and now, things that may do lasting damage if unconsidered. Thanks to that, I don't need to give much further discussion towards the remaining gallery of miscellaneous Wii and DS games. Oh, right, I probably would not have Dimps make a Wii version of Unleashed. I think that's time better spent making amazing 2D games for the DS. Let's see, don't really need to go into Black Knight, the Sega crossovers can do whatever, cover the Olympics. Yeah, okay. I think we're primed and ready to dive straight into the next big Sonic Team game. Sonic Generations. Wait. Oh, right! Sonic Colors! Sonic Colors, yeah. The cornerstone of 2010s, Sonic Colors is a simple Wii platformer made with the sole intention to address criticism received from recent 3D Sonic outings. In doing this, it got critical acclaim and has since been heralded by many as the savior of this messy series. As I'm sure you can guess, where my video is concerned, this presents a problem. See, my earlier leap to Generations is fairly simple to explain. I'm only being consistent with my given policy of there not being B-Team Sonic Team games. If Sonic Colors exists within my timeline, well, it's probably just a souped-up version of a DS game from Dimps. Easy enough, right? Not exactly. You can say it technically began with Unleashed, but unequivocally, Colors is the point where a very, very deliberate approach to distance the series from 06 occurred. Almost everything reminiscent of their overly ambitious 2006 disaster has been removed, and they damn well made sure to let you know as such. In an interview with the director of Unleashed, it was stated that they simply wanted to create an ideal new Sonic game, and it wasn't really a priority to be a departure more than it was to just be good. By contrast, the very concept of Wisps would be explained as a way to offer different kinds of gameplay without bringing out any other characters. As if the characters are the problem and not, I don't know, the shitty gameplay they're tethered to. Well, opinion on the matter aside, what I'm meaning to show is that Color's very identity and significance is how it directly tackled criticism. Sonic is the only playable character not because it's more fitting for the kind of game they're making, but because it's what the people want. The writing is now incredibly silly, obliterating any of the remaining edge or drama found in Unleashed, and having English writing in particular from people who admit that they are not familiar with Sonic. The 4Kids voice cast does not have their contract renewed, despite Sega's previous insistence on voice consistency. Sonic is intentionally given a new actor who sounds nothing like the previous two. Then, to top it off, the game is stated to have its design be directed towards Mario fans on the Nintendo Wii. What I'm getting at is that Colors is a major turning point in the series that fundamentally does not gel with my timeline. Its inception in this form does not come to be because there is no drastic need to make people forget about 06 at all costs. The DS game that will be left instead doesn't have the Wii version's fundamentals to be based on. But most importantly, I have to talk about it because our Wii version of Colors would carry many trends into the following installments. Without it, there is no Pontaf, there is no Nega Wisp Armor, there is no Cubot, and there's no reason to promote each new game by saying it's just like Sonic Colors, it's just like Sonic Colors, please buy it. Now, I'm not really trying to rail on the game, I think there's plenty of great stuff in it, I'm just saying there's a reason many people call the 2010s the Colors era. It feels like more of a reboot than 06 with lines like this.
In just a few hours, Sonic's world will be under my control.
Sonic's world? What are you talking about? In a series with consistent lore, gameplay, and scope, a jolly adventure through an interstellar amusement park would certainly be possible without the intense whiplash Colors presents to the rest of the series. So, as the dedicated third Sonic DS game, I'm just gonna assume for one reason or another that the Wisps are still thought up, although when following the prior 2D games, it doesn't really make sense for Sonic to be the only one to use them. Actually, maybe the Rush games themselves would be pretty different had the advanced games taken a different course. Whatever. Dr. Eggman's incredible interstellar amusement park would not even attempt to disguise itself as a form of atonement because I mean, really? It could just be a straightforward evil scheme like Little Planet. There's no need to have Tails of all people be an idiot and actually buy that Eggman has reformed by chaining together alien planets. Ooh, if they really wanted to embrace that continuity, maybe Tropical Resort could take some cues from a similar idiot plot in Sonic X and fill in the missing half of the moon. Ooh, and wouldn't it be cool if you had an actual Sonic vs. Tails boss fight in Sweet Mountain or Starlight Carnival? Throughout the game, Eggman would be assisted by Orbot as he was in Sonic Unleashed. Orbot is actually helpful with managing projects, and the humor would come from the fact that he's very competently built to keep the Doctor in check, even when the man doesn't like it. Cubot doesn't exist because it doesn't really make sense for Eggman to create idiots to help him, now does it? You might ask why Metal Sonic isn't his designated lackey, but that's because he's evolved beyond that, having an agenda of his own that perhaps he continues to pursue in Sonic Rivals. I guess that's all I got for the Colors chapter. It would just be a really solid new 2D game. I mean, I myself quite like the DS version we have, so it'd basically be that, but with bigger scale, more levels, playable Tails, you know? The main takeaway here is that the series doesn't water itself down to solve its problems. Not just because I don't prefer that, but because it hopefully wouldn't feel the need. Both 3D Sonic and 2D Sonic can be big, and yes, try new things like the Werehog or the Wisps. At this point, we'd be going strong for 20 whole years. And what better way could there be to celebrate our two forms of Sonic, our two ways to play, than with one epic adventure? Sonic Generations is one of the most praised games in the series and is easily one of my favorites. In our own imperfect reality, it stands as a beacon of greatness with tight level design, passionate love for the entire series, and a healthy amount of replayability despite its short length. With it being something I already love, it would be difficult to describe any alternative. However, we're going down a different course of history, so it would only be natural that we're looking at a different generations. With that, do keep in mind most changes made here will not be out of seeking to fix the game. Now, where to begin? I guess no better place to begin than the very first thing we saw when the game was announced. My favorite, Classic Sonic. If you ask me, 100% honestly, surely, ideally, I prefer the classic character designs to be viewed simply as that, character designs. I'd rather they not be canonized and instead be used as an art style whenever the urge arises. In SA1, they still have remnants of a classic art style in various situations, and the same applies in reverse. They used to put the updated, modern designs on the box for classic compilations. You just wouldn't catch him doing that nowadays, but back then, it didn't really matter. Starting with Generations, it does. Maybe I can have my cake and eat it too. Classic Sonic will indeed be Sonic's younger self, but what if in the scene where they're looking at each other in the mirror, the two Sonics don't even see a difference between themselves? A nice wink to the player that the difference in design is simply to distinguish which one you're playing as. It would result in scenes like this making more sense. Also, Classic Sonic isn't that disgusting shade of blue. Yuck. And you know what? Yes, I do object to the fact that he doesn't speak. By the logic of he doesn't speak on the Genesis, Tails and Eggman shouldn't be speaking either. It's so jarring too. Nobody even calls attention to the fact that one day Sonic just decided he would go from not saying a peep to never shutting up. If you ask me, it would be absolutely awesome to have Jaleel White come back one last time for the English classic Sonic voice. I think that's far more exciting for older fans than nothing. Or, you know, I guess Ryan Drummond could try to voice the character like he did in SA1. That would be funny. Yes, well, when we're talking about the voice acting, I suppose that gets us ready to talk about the story, which is an interesting case this time because Generations, barely tries to have one. Because of that, it's easy to forgive its many shortcomings, but it doesn't have to be that way. Yeah, this would be the second or debatably third time a story really centers around time travel, and only 2 main games later even, but unlike 06, this one wouldn't be a multi-layered complex puzzle, rather a really fun jog through memory lane with great character interaction. After all, this game isn't just a tribute to the many awesome places we've been, it's also a tribute to the many awesome faces we've met. For it being the only time we see Sonic celebrate his birthday, I think they should go all out with the attendance. Why is Rouge at Sonic's party and not Shadow? These two barely even talk to each other. Oh right, because when Shadow does appear at the end of a game, he just broods off in a corner. Couldn't let him have too much fun now. Get that shit out of here. He may be colder, but these two are definitely comrades by now. Brothers and quills. Let's get the whole squad here. It'd be pretty cute if Omega was forced to come by Rouge. You can't tell me that Big would turn down the opportunity to hang out and eat cake. What, is our Metacritic score going to plummet if this friendly feline attends Sonic's birthday party? Bah, I say. Silver would also be at Sonic's party. A creative liberty I am taking is that following the events of Sonic Rivals, Silver stays in the past for one reason or another. Maybe he doesn't return to the future because he realizes that a changed future is no longer his home, and everyone he ever knew is now part of an alternate reality. Maybe he stays behind because he took a one-way ticket through time with Eggman Mega, and is now searching for a way to go back. In our timeline, they don't bother to explain the nature of Silver's time travel, and they just conjure up reasons for him to show up in every game he's in. It's pretty lame, and I doubt Shadow and Rouge would have a baby Trunks, let's say. So this is a way we could avoid issues with using this character past his initial appearance. Throughout the course of a game, Sonic would restore these characters within white space, and they would have flavorful, reminiscent cutscenes with each other for every location you visit, not just Green Hill and Chemical Plant. In the cases of Shadow and Silver, you would relive battles from a distant and alternate past, saving the present counterparts of those characters in the process. It'd be great to see them reflect on just how they've grown past their initial rivalries. Cool stuff like that could be everywhere. I suppose one logical question would be why these characters just sit back while Sonic does all the work, and I can think of a decent enough reason. All of these places are specifically from Sonic's past, so mysteriously, only he would be able to venture into them while they're in a state of limbo. It'd be a nice way of alluding to the true nature of a time eater. The way Sonic restores the world and his friends is by ensuring that his past victories stay that way. It would culminate in an epic final encounter with none other than Dr. Eggman and his past self. Although instead of Sonic's friends just coming in and saying dumb shit like, "You've got this, Sonic," they would actually try to fight the Time Eater in the cutscene, giving our heroes just enough time to go super. Kind of a my friends are my power moment. Oh, and finally, maybe there should be some semblance of time travel rules here to ensure that the characters meeting their past selves isn't a headache to begin with. Personally, I've always liked the late Archie idea of classic Sonic going back to his time period and forgetting the whole thing ever happened. Of course, this is amplified by the result of what they went with instead, but let's keep it to Generations for now. This time more than ever before, the real meat of a game is the content you are playing. Being essentially a best of title, there's not a lot of new changes to dissect, and thankfully there's little that I think fundamentally causes problems. A lot of the standard suggestions I have made for the whole 3D series would apply here, of course. Modern Sonic would be fully 3D and would simply evolve from his previous iteration, while classic Sonic, I don't really have anything to say on him other than I hope his physics are a bit better. The idea of mapping the spin dash to a button I think is excellent, so I would keep that, and maybe you could unlock abilities from the handheld 2D games, but he's basically sound. I'd also revert the limitations given to wall jumps and ring dashes. I don't think that's necessary. Other than that, I mean, Generations also already has a pretty decent approach to side content that other games don't have. Plenty of alternate missions, with some including Sonic's friends, fun unlockables such as music to play at your leisure, and new skills for you to experiment with to your heart's content. All we're missing is a jaw-dropping, secret, super-duper unlockable. Once we have that, we're basically back in SA2 territory. But the problem is that it doesn't feel like this game is as loaded with content since the core game is so short, even mandating the player to complete some of these side missions to be as long as it is. Because the team would hypothetically not be working on Sonic Colors, there's more time to worry about the roster of zones and bosses, extending the game's length, if even just a bit. The higher effort towards cutscenes would maybe help with that. Also, I imagine that the stages might be a bit longer, but who knows. In this version of Generations, there would be no Sonic Colors level since it's not a mainline title, and instead we would have a stage for Sonic CD. Thus, I suppose there wouldn't really be segregation between console eras since it would be rather uneven, and there would be more bosses than just 2 per generation. Nay, each represented game would have a thrilling boss fight in addition to its playable stage. I can't be the only one bothered by how classic Sonic gets 2 bosses while modern Sonic gets 4, so I would have the game give a more even spread for the 2 playstyles. You could have the game alternate between them for every other boss fight, ending with you controlling both of them for the Supersonic Time Eater fight, or I guess you could control them both for every boss fight, but I kinda prefer the build-up of the prior method. Speaking of build-up, don't you find it anticlimactic that the final stage is Planet Wisp and then you just go straight to the final boss? What? Me too! So in my cut, there would be a final stage to go with the Time Eater, something kinda similar to Eggman Land, where you swap between the 2 game components in one epic gauntlet. To be honest, I wouldn't be surprised if this were an intended idea that had to be scrapped in our game. So if we have bosses for each title and 1 extra combined level, we'd be left with about 19 stages and 10 bosses. If I may demonstrate, it would be mapped out as such. It made some modifications here and there. Not too much more than what we have right now, but I think it'd be a healthy roster of stuff to play in addition to anything else that they might think to do with the dev time. I do imagine the hub world may be a bit more enticing as well if it were fully 3D and felt more like a logical progression of the hubs from Unleashed. You wouldn't really have much to do in it without the resident NPCs, but it would prove more entertaining to make each area feel like its own place rather than just a 2D plane with gates. I can definitely see a Generations that's just brimming with even more content to be rewarded when the player does unique hub world challenges, gets red rings, gets S ranks. The game may not be too long, but that's okay because of how much stuff there is to do. At the end of it all, I guess there isn't too terribly much that would shift with Generations aside from general pretenses given in this timeline. What else can I say? It's just a bangin' video game, but I think almost fully realizes its dream intention even in the timeline we live in. Though, as a last footnote, I think it's important to think about the context in which Generations is even created. The word nostalgia has a pretty negative sting to a lot of Sonic fans, myself obviously included. I've neglected to mention it until now, but Sonic the Hedgehog 4, what a game, the true beginning of nostalgia being a major part of the series' identity. I don't think I need to explain what went wrong with this one, but we should remember that it only came to be because of just how much of a bad rep the 3D games had. People were crying out over and over for the games to just go back to the good old days and not have any of this Shadow or Gods of Destruction, none of this stuff. So hastily, Sonic 4 was made, the true return to 2D. Needless to say, this entire thing does not happen in a better reality. However, that then raises the question, does Sonic Generations even happen? Maybe not, but it has every reason to. With how badly Sonic 4 misunderstands the purpose and usage of nostalgia, Generations exists as a perfect foil, embracing its nature rather than pretending it's an authentic follow-up to something that used to be original. Even if there is little desire to see classic Sonic, even if both 3D and 2D evolved and lived in harmony, Sonic Generations has meaning in its existence because it stands as the ultimate celebration of 2 whole decades. Many franchises don't even get to exist for that long, so it's really special, and with the Sonic series, there's a lot of content to pull from. That alone is worth consideration following the completion of Sonic Unleashed, and even when things weren't going so great, even when the series was a joke in the realms of the internet, they still celebrated all of it. Everything. 06, Unleashed, bits and pieces of Shadow and Secret Rings, its commitment, its integrity, and it's ambitious in its own right to take all of it and creatively deliver a fun package for fans of all kinds. This would be the one game quite like it. After Sonic Generations, the series could press on, ready to meet a whole new line of challenges in a new decade. Indeed, a major challenge would present itself in the aftermath we would come to witness. The Wii U deal. Directly after the development of Sonic Colors, the team experimented around with Sonic in the background as production continued on Generations. Eventually, it seemed clear that a new mainline entry exclusive to Nintendo's upcoming console, the Wii U, would be a very profitable idea. Sonic has always seen a lot of success on Nintendo consoles, and Colors was the epitome of this trend. Surely, as a business, it's a no-brainer to enter a contract with Nintendo, decreeing that the next 3 Sonic games would be exclusive to their systems, right? So, dedicated to the cause, the next Sonic Team game would be Sonic Lost World. And, no. This Wii U partnership, I would say, is one of, in fact, no, probably the biggest mistake in Sonic history. We start with the fact that Sonic Team wastes their time making a game with the exceedingly obvious goal of ripping off Mario. It worked so well to nudge Colors in that traditional kids platformer direction that when it comes time to literally sign ourselves over to Nintendo, we're going all in. This game, much like Shadow the Hedgehog, is fundamentally an idea built upon chasing a dollar sign without any care to how it would fit in the bigger picture. Likewise, if it exists in this timeline, it too is a very different game, because in the first place, there is no Sonic Colors on the Wii for it to follow up on, the Wisps aren't coming back from the DS game, and Sega doesn't chase that Nintendo money so hard that they lock themselves onto a console and then try their best to feed red meat to the local lions. I could maybe see a Sonic Lost World working as the next Dimps game for the 3DS. If you close your eyes, forget everything you know of it right now, and just imagine a game that has you explore a hidden Jack and the Beanstalk kind of world and fight its 6 deadly inhabitants with Sonic, Tails, Knuckles, and Amy, that sounds a bit interesting, right? There's no need to make it a childish and generic platformer that throws out almost everything a Sonic fan would like about Sonic. This does not feel like it's part of the same series as this. I advocate for freedom to experiment, freedom to be creative, but I can't even say they were doing either of those things with Lost World, as I certainly don't see this experiment yielding any constructive result aside from getting money. There are limits. Above all else, though, we got some big next-gen consoles coming out. Why are we focused on making dated responses when instead we can make art? Of course, if you like the game, more power to you. But I don't think it can so easily be denied that this was an unnecessary detour, one that simply wouldn't happen under any circumstance if going by the philosophy Sega would be employing in my scenario. But that's just part 1 of the disaster that befell Sonic in the 2010s. Part 2 is Sonic Boom, the absolute nail in the coffin that was this arrangement with Nintendo. Very, very long story short, Sega sought after a Western revitalization of the Sonic IP in 2011 at the latest. The given story was that a cartoon show was decided on first, hoping to repeat the success of Sonic X back in the 2000s, and then games would be made to promote it. Sometime after this began, however, Sega struck the deal with Nintendo. Thus, the game at the time known as Sonic Synergy was horrifically downscaled to try and work on the Wii U. What's more is that, evidently, the project had a far greater life of its own before it was decided at a later point that it would tie into a new Sonic TV series. Even with these intense changes, Sega was not in any mood to delay the game. Sonic Boom: Rise of Lyric would go on to be the worst received and worst selling Sonic game ever, ironically not even being able to reap the benefits imagined when working with Nintendo. As fate would have it, there was never a guarantee that the Wii U would be a raging hit like its predecessor, and it backfired hard when Lost World and Boom did not reach sales expectations. The fallout was catastrophic, leading to many layoffs, company losses, and you may wonder what on earth they could do to salvage Sonic after this. I'll give you one guess which of these options they chose. This whole thing does not happen. None of it. Okay, maybe the Boom TV show does happen in some form, I don't really care. Point is, we never get 3 years of Sonic Boom and mobile games. Instead of banking on this risky $1 million side project, Sonic continues releasing spin-off games as it did in the 2000s. A real Sonic Riders 3, an RPG, a character spin-off. It would all service the longevity of his franchise as we wait for the next-gen AAA masterpiece. You know, in the first place, I don't know why the idea of a dramatically different Western branch was thought of in the midst of creating Sonic Generations. Even in our own timeline, there wasn't really a need to shake things up quite like that. If you want to attract even more players from the West, well, isn't that what a movie would be for? But when I put it like that, it does make me wonder if we'd get a movie sooner had the series been seen as this premium brand. Either way, if that were the case, then there really would be no incentive for an ordeal like Boom to happen at all. There's plenty of great and varied releases on Sonic's plate as is. One of those releases would be Sonic Mania, except in this timeline, Sonic Mania does not happen. Wait! Just wait a minute, okay? Christ. Sonic Mania does not happen because 2D Sonic is consistently considered top quality 3 and Knuckles tier stuff, and there is no need to, quote, return to it. By all means though, fans could join in and work on official new games, and you know, if we went with classic Sonic simply being an art direction and not the very spawn of nostalgia itself, I think it would be great to see a game in that style. I reiterate, just because there is a change presented to be more appropriate within this new context, that does not mean I am saying it is deplorable trash. But speaking of which, it seems time to finally address the last main series game to date, in perhaps the most interesting case of all. What would follow Sonic Mania in our universe? Well, let's just say it's been met with quite the resistance. The 8th generation of console gaming has dawned upon us with the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One. I imagine that if Sonic Team isn't developing Lost World for 2.5 years, they're able to get their next title out much sooner than 2017. My guess would be around 2014, a year after console launch. And hey, maybe they could buy time by giving the eager audience some Generations DLC, featuring content from the handheld and spin-off games. Without their budget being destroyed, without many team members feeling the urge to leave, without having their vision muddied up after Generations, the majority of Sonic Team is hard at work to create the next massive leap. Remember, this game is our first real ascension in terms of system capabilities since 2006. It is easy to forget when you look at the 2017 game we got. You know, the one that many would argue looks worse than the 2008 and 2011 games? Okay, so yeah, I'm just gonna warn you that this is the game that will be receiving the most changes out of any of them, because it's in a very unique position. It's not inherently something to erase and start from scratch like Shadow or Lost World, but it's also not something that would remain as close to our version as my envisioned Heroes, 06, or even Unleashed and Generations did. We're officially in the endgame now. All the context, all the buildup, all the intention is completely different in the universe we are now looking at. This would be apparent even in its graphics and art style, truly instilling that wow feeling that Sonic 1, Adventure, and 06 all made it a point to do. After all, this is a very significant point in the greater Sonic universe. None of that Minecraft tree, short-quilled, baby blue nonsense here. This game's essence would come to be through one question. Sonic Generations focused on all of Sonic's previous victories, but what would happen if he finally lost? Not like his fake-out death in SA2 or his quickly alleviated death in 06, if that would still happen. No. This time, he and his friends would all lose to Dr. Eggman after the merrier times of Generations, and there would be consequences that are not so easily undone. A bold new direction to take after the safer entry just prior. Buckle up, kids. This is Sonic Forces. I still think that title's kinda gross. Normally I would start with stuff from a conceptual stage, but I think I'll begin with gameplay this time because it's probably more self-explanatory. Of course, this is a Forces in a timeline where the boost formula does not exist, so that's already different. But unlike all the previous entries, this time there's going to be some big changes to the playable cast. A few reasons. Number 1, I think of all the character groups we've seen, the trios, the duos, the whole squad, the one in Sonic Forces sticks out like a sore thumb. Oh yeah, I love the fascinating contrast between Sonic again, and a dude. Right away, the easiest solution to this problem is to not include classic Sonic. He had his time in Generations, that was his game. It's okay, we don't need him. We don't need him. One could suggest to get rid of the avatar, but I don't really think that's necessary. It's true that they were included to interest people who want to create their own Sonic character, but many people have taken this to the literal extent of it exists as a shallow cash grab for people who make recolors on DeviantArt. Like it or not, custom characters have been a thing in many franchises by now. It's not really fair to hold the embarrassing stigma of Cold Steel the Hedgehog over this series to the point where it's barred from including a feature that can appeal to, well, everyone. Truthfully, I don't think it would even be received in this lame, people-pleasing fashion if a game were committed to its obvious original intent of just Sonic and the Avatar. Having classic Sonic in the mix understandably creates the impression that this game genuinely has no goal outside of jerking off the masses. But you know, I'll take it a step beyond. I have no doubt that in the timeline I am talking about, there would still be a vocal sect of people who are a little bummed by only playing as Sonic in the previous 2 main titles. So in our world, when the idea of joining the Resistance popped up, it seemed like there could not be a better time to bring these characters back. Indeed, in the Sonic Forces where 06 wasn't a flop, I believe it'd only be natural that the game focuses not just on Sonic and the Avatar. Rather, this game would fully embrace its identity and focus on everyone, with your avatar as the central character. This can be done by having the other characters essentially work as the amigos would in 06, with your avatar still retaining the most screen time. They could join you in tag team sections, or they could even have a few whole scenarios of their own. For example, maybe when your avatar is busy on the front lines, Eggman unleashes a surprise attack on the Resistance base, finally giving Amy a much desired opportunity to get off the computer and go wreck some shit. That segment of a story where Sonic and Silver fought Infinite was a notable glimpse at what this game can be. Like, I want that kind of stuff to be what you play. The game variety could be endless, and it would be a way to show that these characters are involved without just telling us that they are. There's not really a great reason to have them be excluded from the gameplay like there would be in Unleashed or Generations, so I say, let it be so. Right, I do need to reiterate that the major new focus of the game would be your own custom character. And while I have expressed the more critical side of their inclusion, I think many would also say that it's the one piece of identity this game has. It's the one thing you will remember as something fun you could distinctly find in Sonic Forces. When you think about it, it kinda sounds like a dream come true, to be able to make your own Sonic character right down to how they play. It's unfortunate that they are chained to this extremely limiting game, because you can practically feel how it could have gone better. Simply put, this hypothetical iteration of the avatar would be greatly expanded. Now, nobody likes a god modder, so they would still be relegated to weapons and gadgets, giving them their own feeling in comparison to the other members of the Resistance. In fact, the weapons can even still be Wispons, though contextually different. It would be weaponry made by Tails to mimic the powerful Wisp abilities found during his time at Dr. Eggman's incredible interstellar amusement park. However, the Wisps themselves would not appear since their planets have long since departed, and therefore they would not be required for these unique abilities to work. Essentially, your avatar would have access to a wide range of options beyond just the Wispon you select. You could unlock different variations of attacks and mobility options for each Wispon, ensuring that one doesn't necessarily feel crappy compared to another because they would all have their own settings in favor of your preference. Of course, since combat never really left in this scenario, you would have additional things to think about there as well, rather than just mashing your way through mindless enemies. I'm not sure if a grapple hook would necessarily always be tied to your person, as it was kind of the Werehogs thing in Unleashed, but I definitely think it'd be awesome to have it as one of the many options you can choose for a gadget alongside your Wispon. Well, I say this with it being a given that the grapple hook would be really fun to use and not a source of automation. Actually, I say all this with it being a given that the control would be on point, the levels will be fully 3D, they'd have scale and energy, but I digress. This game would give you the feeling of growth, the feeling of strength as you expand your forces. There could be a very small hub world in the form of Resistance HQ, where you walk around, talk to your fellow soldiers, and do activities to earn new items for your character. The level up mechanics from Unleashed, as I mentioned before, could come into play here with your equipment and affinity with other Sonic characters. But I guess I just personally like RPGs and customization, so obviously I think that all sounds great. Oh, and since we're on the topic of expanding the capabilities of the avatar, I think that should also apply to them cosmetically. The forces we got had a decent amount of stuff to equip, but I just need more. Height and weight alteration, more species, facial features, additional hair and quills, the whole 9 yards. I guess this is why I suggest an admittedly risky move in focusing primarily on the avatar, while Sonic himself shares a lesser yet still important role with his friends. If you're customizing the character to this extent, it only seems more meaningful and rewarding to have them occupy most of the gameplay. This may be the only time something like this can naturally happen, so I would hope they are truly dedicated and confident in it, so that it may be enjoyable for all kinds of players. This is the moment for you, quite literally, to join the fight. On that note, we transition to the story, as I don't think I can say much else on how the game plays without analyzing its place in greater context. One thing that makes Sonic Forces so disappointing is that it genuinely promised us a return to storytelling that had been just about completely absent in the most recent titles. In this imaginary realm, it never got to be so drastic a contrast. Sonic never became a comedy series that relied on the appeal of being what it wasn't. Instead, it was a series that could be flexible in telling lighter or heavier stories with a solid cast of characters to glue it all together and have it peacefully coexist. There's nothing unnatural about it either. If anything, it's more true to life. Some days are fun, other days are not. But the thing that makes it your story is you and the people around you. Sonic Forces is meant to be one of those grueling, nightmarish challenges for our favorite heroes, but it ends up being presented like an 11-minute TV episode. Alternatively, much like the inclusion of Sonic's playable friends, the story would be a true return to the darker, more complex storytelling found in SA1, SA2, and 06. This time, there wouldn't be overlapping character stories, but most of the resistance would still feel integral to the narrative, having more defined and cinematic moments throughout. True, your avatar would be the main character, but for them to organically make a difference, everyone else needs to give it their all as well. The DNA for this sort of thing does lie somewhere in Forces, buried deep under fear, hesitance to actually go through with any new, crazy ideas. That, and a staggering lack of time to put these things into place. Luckily, neither of these things would be so big an issue in this timeline. Naturally, if the game is longer and contains more cutscenes, these possibilities are more likely to manifest. We're looking at an 06 tier story where a lot of it is solid on paper, but it sucks, so we need to think about it again. Examples. Knuckles being the leader of a resistance is actually a really cool idea, not just because you would normally expect Sonic to lead it, but because it's finally a way to give this character some meaningful screen time. I can see a story where Knuckles is elected to lead the resistance because of his honed warrior instincts. He would ascribe to certain traditions having to do with his people and how they would prepare for war. But unlike Pachacamac, he would pave the way for peace instead of power. Also, maybe as the leader of resistance, he would make it a priority to have headquarters be on Angel Island. You kinda don't want Eggman to steal the Master Emerald? The last line of defense? Ideally, instead of this game ironically lampshading how stupid the character is written by having him make reckless, YOLO decisions, it would be an incredible way to show how the character has grown from a misguided loner to a solid leader who's able to place his trust in the right people. Tails just losing it is another concept I actually admire. It's a way for him to be a grown individual as he felt in SA2, a refreshing change of pace compared to his recent appearances of being unceremoniously tethered to Sonic. Of course, this plotline goes nowhere and Tails ends up being the most insufferable character in the whole game. But what if he wasn't? What if, upon believing that Sonic was dead, Tails felt irrepressible guilt and would distance himself from the rest of his friends? It would seem that he no longer has the will to fight, but it'd be quite the opposite. He would be working from the shadows, raiding Eggman's various establishments by himself and stealing tech in hopes that he may be able to come back to his friends with something to show for himself. When he returns, he'll serve as the primary munitions expert for your avatar to get new gear from. I could do this all day, really. Rouge and SBO would be great for recon missions. Vector would ask Dr. Eggman where the fuck the money is now that he's taken over the world. Omega would be a powerhouse on the front lines once he's finally repaired by Tails, rather than coming back with no explanation and firing a dinky laser. Man, I think you get the idea. However, this gold mine of untapped potential is not just limited to our heroes. Among the sins committed by this game, the act of a sinister 6 ending up as a complete ratings trap was pretty high on the list. To put it bluntly, either actually have him in the game or don't bother at all. I absolutely adore the idea of a heroes versus villains scenario. Not just because it reminds me of SA2, but also because it seems like a logical factor in Eggman taking over the world. The game is called Sonic Forces, after all. I understand that it could probably be difficult to write, maybe it would be too much to balance. One could argue that the idea only exists in our world to tug at your nostalgic heartstrings, and on that merit, I could definitely settle for focusing only on Eggman and Infinite. But this idea is too cool for me to gloss over, and remember, one of my goals is to keep as many ideas from our timeline as I can, while also making sacrifices where I deem necessary. So, how could a band of admins for the Eggman Empire work? Well, okay, gonna have to take some hefty creative liberties here with the lineup, but hopefully it'll all make sense. Chaos does not appear in this game. I have run it through my head over and over, and I just don't think there genuinely is a way to include him that doesn't feel immensely contrived. For one, he ascended to the heavens or something with Tikal. I know he's in Sonic Battle, but I think it's stupid for him to be there too. Say he does magically come back, well, I still don't think there's any incentive whatsoever for him to join Eggman's side, nor do I think the Doctor would even want to work with him again. He's a primal force of nature who was only destructive because of his hatred for people's greed. You could say that maybe Infinite could manipulate him into thinking the Resistance is the enemy, but I just think there's too much that could go wrong there. Another cut from the list is Zavok, because, well, I'm sure he'd exist in some form through the new Sonic Lost World on 3DS, but I think when we start reaching for the handheld villains, it might get a bit cluttered. I kind of imagine that the development team would be attached to their own villains, so even if he's an entirely different character, and better for it, no Zavok. I can't speak on what I don't know. Okay, now on to the people who will join. Shadow the Hedgehog. As many people had wrongly speculated during pre-release, he would serve as a sort of double agent for the Resistance. You'll notice throughout the game that he's never actively pursuing Eggman's destructive goals, and if anything, he's sabotaging the Empire from within to buy time. Unlike the other villains, he didn't help Eggman conquer the world in the first place. Instead, he would go along with a proposition offered to him later by the Doctor. The man would promise that once the Master and Chaos Emeralds are in his possession, he would use them to directly or indirectly revive Gerald and Maria Robotnik. However, Shadow would not truly give in to this temptation because that's not the person he is, and perhaps Eggman would know all along that he wouldn't either. More on that later. The next villain would be Metal Sonic, who is a bit more self-explanatory. He's been off on his own for a while now, but he's decided to form a new partnership with his old master after realizing that the newest plan to take over the world is pretty likely to work. It would be the closest Metal could have to a robot kingdom at this point, and more importantly, it would finally establish his dominance as the everlasting Sonic. Okay, so for this next one, just bear with me. Hold on to your butts for a moment, because I have a reason. The next villain in the Rogues Gallery would be none other than Mephiles the Dark. Did you know? Mephiles was actually mentioned in the leaked beta script of Sonic Forces. Guess, at some point someone was like, hey,
We can't use him. He doesn't exist anymore.
You may be shocked to hear that I would forgo this limitation, but here's why. Dr. Eggman's escape from white space at the end of Generations was given no explanation, unlike his escape from space at the end of Colors. So what if, by messing with time and space, Eggman had prompted another temporal being from a now defunct timeline to be released into his own? Being able to use the Terran reality to escape his own fleeting time stream, Mephiles would strike a deal with Eggman that he would free him from white space in exchange for a supplied physical form. With his plans to remain as Solaris foiled, Mephiles would have no problem working with Eggman's limitless resources to exact cruel vengeance and suffering upon those blissful enough to not remember him. Yes. And finally, our sixth member, one you wouldn't dare to cross, one who is the key to all of this, Orbot. No, I'm actually serious. Again, the Orbot and Cubot we have just exist to sit around and make fun of Eggman, so it's really hard to picture, but imagine if Orbot continued to be a helpful right-hand lackey, as I mentioned before with Colors. He would act as something of an embassy for the Eggman Empire, showing a far more diplomatic attitude than his peers. He would essentially serve as the calm voice of reason in this group of otherwise violent characters. Being devoutly loyal to Eggman, he could prove helpful in keeping everything in check while not having any ulterior or emotional motives. He could also get his hands dirty when absolutely necessary and pilot some big mecha boss fight so that you thematically don't actually fight Eggman himself until the end. Oh, and maybe it would be more interesting than the Egg Dragoon randomly coming back to throw trash bags. But above all that, Orbot would kind of serve as our villain representation for Sonic Unleashed, since, yeah, kinda doubt that Dark Gaia will be showing up for this one. Hopefully, this would prove a balanced cast of bad dudes from across the series to really provide a sense of stakes for this title.
It's, really silly, I know,
But I saved the best for last. The most integral pieces of this puzzle, Dr. Eggman and the new character, Infinite. It is absolutely criminal how this isn't Eggman's star appearance, and it's not happenstance either. Nothing spells this out more than the very opening cutscene of a game where he reminds the audience that he hates Sonic and won't lose to him this time. Ho-ho! The rest of the game is treated almost no differently than the previous games in the 2010s, where Eggman sits around and yells. Constantly, we are told he means business, but in the 90s and 2000s, I didn't need to be told that. It's paramount to this game's identity to have Eggman be at his prime. You can't tell me that after 6 months of ruling the world, he'd be sitting around throwing a fit in Green Hill. No, this Eggman should be chock full of master schemes and contingencies. He knows his team could betray him at any moment, so he has backup plans for when they do, such as using Shadow's obviously suspect nature to keep a better eye on the Resistance. You would see a far more active attempt at conquest rather than him lazily sitting around waiting for Infinite to do things. This bleeds into many things, such as the levels. Returning stages, when done properly, can be very effective. Ideally, Sonic Forces has mostly original stages and has a very well-established identity and history of its own, but inevitably the premise of a game creates a natural curiosity in the player towards people and locations of old. In a timeline where the lore is kept in indiscriminate consideration, you wouldn't be going to Chemical Plant, the random processing facility from Sonic 2. You'd be going to Central City, you know, a landmark that is actually very relevant to the world that is getting taken over. You would see that Gun has been forced to surrender entirely, a true testament to just how powerful Eggman's army has become. As I mentioned, Angel Island would be incredibly relevant too, since it houses the last bastion of hope, the Master Emerald. The literal floating island would be the 1% of a world that Eggman has not taken over, instead of city. I understand the inclusion of Green Hill, even if it's not actually a significant place in the lore, and to be fair, even after Sonic Generations, it probably wouldn't be so egregious to see if he didn't have 4, Lost World, and Mania using it as well. But even this doesn't quite feel right in the retail product. Even the simple imagery of the lush, iconic first level being completely destroyed falls flat because it's literally just Green Hill with sand in it.
Green Hill's looking a lot more like Sand Hill right now.
Fuck that. Commit to the idea and stop worrying about the rigid minority that would say it's too dark for a kid's game. I want to see these places absolutely devastated like the concept art seems to imply. I want to see the effect this has on the world and not just South and West Side Island. Where are the smiling Eggman faces? Like, this is his game. One idea in the game that seemed pretty cool was Metropolis, a bright-looking utopian city. You would think that this place would be a public reminder of the good future Eggman is crafting for the world, a hollow distraction from the pollution and bloodshed elsewhere. This is never brought up in the game, but it so easily can be. I could write a book, I swear it. It extends to characters too. Sonic should be a changed man after being forced to watch the world go to shit for 6 months. Instead, what he says to the horrible dictator taking over the world is this.
Your plan will end like all your plans do, with you sitting in a pile of busted robot parts wondering how you failed so badly.
I'm not saying to make the game devoid of any fun, but Christ. One scene in Sonic Adventure 2 says 1,000 words about this dynamic more than the game that literally puts words on the screen. Sorry, I got carried away, but it's not just me caring too much about story, it's the whole creative experience. If the game is really dedicated to the idea it set out to pull off, then all aspects of the game should more easily follow. Giving us more interesting scenarios thanks to our main antagonist would naturally beckon more involved gameplay segments than boring straight lines, I assure you of that. Infinite the Jackal is yet another concept that seems incredibly appealing on paper and is left more ironically appealing than it should be. This game features plenty of returning stuff for veterans, but having an awesome new character of its own would just be the cherry on top. In theory, he is quite awesome indeed, as in jaw-dropping, you're in awe. A villain who is literally able to make their thoughts a reality, I mean, it's huge. But as you dig deeper, you realize just how edgy the character is. It paints a cynical picture that the character is a shameless and misguided attempt to reel in yet another set of fanboys from the internet. Or maybe with a dose of real self-awareness, Infinite's energy is more brilliant than we realize. Don't get me wrong, the character we got is pathetically ineffective for a number of reasons. But what if, instead of being a borderline joke character, Infinite wore this imperfection like a glove? I think he actually has a pretty interesting basis to go off of here, but it's unfortunately explored so little due to it being entirely irrelevant to the main game. So, if you'll allow me, this timeline's Infinite would be treated far more carefully, but his very nature would be a lot more unhinged than any of the prior rivals or villains. Infinite is a character themed around masking insecurity and weakness. Or at least you feel he should be, but this doesn't really come up outside of episode Shadow, with the exception of this line.
Your mask can't hide how sad and lonely you are. That Phantom Ruby virtual reality of yours is the real illusion.
What if we ran with that? Infinite would be a very confused and angry boy. He's not exactly a super credible, intelligent mastermind, but that would be kind of a point. You would be able to discover that he declined in the ranks of bounty hunting to the point where he became desperate enough that he would work with Dr. Eggman. I actually love the idea of having a new character who doesn't turn on Eggman, but this is, of course, not really discussed in the game. You kinda wonder why Infinite doesn't do that. You'd think he'd be the true final boss like so many of the past villains. But I can think of a few good reasons. Reasons that seemed more logical in earlier builds of the script. It seemed that without Mania, the Phantom Ruby was actually devised as an invention known as the Valtron. This is why the forces we got is so focused on the Phantom Ruby being an invention of Eggman's, because they kinda daisy-chained it to Mania at the last second. There's also this line about how Infinite was, like, created.
So this is where Eggman built Infinite. It's so sad. What a lonely place to be brought into the world.
Like, the fuck? Clearly, there was something going on behind the scenes, and what we're left with is this travesty that needs to be explained through afterthought DLC and comics that are never referenced in the main story. As is law in this dream world, that would not happen. I don't know about you, but I think Eggman inventing something incredible makes far more sense than him finding a mystical doohickey on his doorstep and cloning it. So, perhaps there could be some marriage of intentions where the Doctor would invent the Valtron and fuse it to his more agile, willing ally. He would make it clear that if a jackal tries anything funny, the device could be remotely detonated. However, there would be no need, as the newly reborn Infinite would have nothing but genuine gratitude for Eggman. He's finally granted a pitiful mercenary a chance to shed his weakness. Over the course of a game, you would gradually wake Infinite up to the truth that what makes him weak is his reliance on power, and he would increasingly become less able to maintain this air of confident omnipresence. Instead of having him freak out because he wasn't able to beat the lab-engineered ultimate life form, I think it'd be way more effective to have him freak out at the end of a game, because even with the power to make reality what he wants, he can't beat a plucky group of colorful pals. The true reality is one he doesn't even like, and that is to be a coward who's thrown away any real semblance of friendship. It's edgy, but it's genuine, unapologetic, and once again, committed. We wouldn't need to nerf the character by having him do stupid things like leave Sonic alone after beating him a second time, because everyone else would be competent enough that such a lazy plot development wouldn't happen. He wouldn't need to be told he's a loser like it's a playground fight, because it would just be evident in how over the top he is. I mean, really, it seems like I just took his basic form and spiced up the presentation a bit, but yeah, I did. Presentation, timing, execution, that's all relevant to giving the character a presence. Because as it is, he's so close to greatness, but ends up being a goon who just wanders around spouting pseudo-dark nonsense with little chemistry to speak of. All this is to say that the game would and should be a next-generation epic that gets people of all ages and backgrounds excited for Sonic the Hedgehog yet again. All of these ideas, all of these different artists and actors, generations would serve as a compilation of everything, but Forces would serve as the culmination of everything. Certainly, I think Sonic Forces should be seen as the new landmark. Things would really change with this title. Our expectations would rise instead of lower, our perception of what can be done could be broadened. But even in universe, things would change too. Characters would go through a meaningful journey, one that isn't even written out of existence like 06. Places would be changed forever. Status quo would be broken, because this is an ever-evolving universe. Instead of a final battle with lame recycled boss fights, could you imagine a truly stunning finale that makes even the likes of Solaris look like baby cakes? This would be the end of a war that spanned over half a year. This is the moment. If Dr. Eggman has finally reached a level of power that compares to that of the gods, then it should really feel like it. I know it's considered cliche, but really, could it be anything other than a triumphant combined effort between everyone? Would the Chaos Emeralds, the miracle gems that have so much power over the world, really not be a part of this? Is this truly any lamer than fighting the Nega Wisp armor a third time for what's supposed to be one of the most climactic moments in the series? I say no. In a world where Sonic continues to strive for the best, I know we would see something else. I'm thinking I'll take a page out of Mania here, and we would see a duo final boss fight. Eggman and Infinite would team up, pushing the Valtron to its absolute limit, posing the ultimate threat that could end up wiping out the entire resistance. Everyone would have to give it their all as the fight would rage on in the middle of a massive battlefield, and instead of having a final collaborative level like Cannon's Core or End of a World, we'd have a significantly multifaceted boss fight that swaps between every character, all facing the same huge target. Then, to cap off the emphasis on player interactivity, you would be given a choice before the decisive bout. A choice of which three characters would harness the energy of the Chaos Emeralds and participate in the final phase. Should you choose your avatar, you'd be able to design their own super form, and it'd just be... yes, right. I did say I would try to leave things to your imagination. Guess I just had to show a bit more of my own for this chapter. The conclusion of Sonic Forces would feel earned. No empty speak of cleaning up the world we live in, no forced ending dialogue about how this sure did change everything, but we'll be friends forever. Nah, because you would already know. You'd be done with a turning point in this series. You'd have just played a game that isn't content with focus charts or buzzwords or anything. Just an exciting adventure that further establishes Sonic as a dynamic AAA series. I have talked so extensively about Sonic Forces, not just because with this one it's well, it's personal, but because it would be the most changed of a things not explicitly erased if Sonic had taken a different path. This game is following not one disaster, but two in our timeline. Where we are now is a road of uncertainty, but one would think that following such a major game as this, we'd end up down a completely different kind of uncertain road. With Dr. Eggman seemingly engulfed in null space at the end of a game, perhaps we could get a post-credits scene where we finally see Infinite without his mask, and now left with a powerless Valtron. Brandishing his sword from days of old, he would depart for places unknown with equally shrouded motives. As for us... wait, Team Sonic Racing, right. This game doesn't exist in this timeline because the Sonic Riders series continued as our central racing spin-off series. Maybe, Team Sonic Riders? Yeah. Or, maybe Suma Digital continues its kart racing endeavors with yet another Sega All-Stars racing title. I don't see the point in diminishing the unique appeals of these two racing series when clearly people enjoyed both as their own things before. Also, when it comes to the quality of these games, it'd be nice if we had a decent budget, character selection, and post-launch support. Thank you. Now that we're talking about the usual miscellaneous releases, I suppose right at the end here I'll mention that one catalyst for me making this video was a certain re-release. I'm sure you're aware of it. Now, we're not going to date this video too hard by talking about that specifically, but there is one constant thing about Sonic which makes this topic a little less tangential. That is, that Sonic just sucks with releasing legacy content. Like, dude, what happened? I used to be able to play virtually the entire series, including side games, on my GameCube. But to tie it back into the what-if scenario thesis, let me just say that I understand how game development takes a long time. We are currently undergoing the largest wait for a mainline Sonic release ever. Fans are getting restless, like more restless than normal. This is why companies with big-name IPs like this will release spin-off games to tide the more invested consumer over for a bit. But there is another way to do that, and one which takes significantly less planning. That is releasing your catalog of games for people to play on newer systems. Sonic used to do this, but at some point they stopped, and so when they finally re-release something, it's made so much bigger of a deal than it really needs to be because that is the Sonic thing we're getting this year. And then, when it's not a very good release, it's made far more damaging. In a world where Sonic isn't literally so afraid of its legacy that it would refuse to get whatever money it can out of it and would instead risk it all by placing all of their bets on new releases, the entire main series lineup, Heroes, 06, Unleashed, these would be on PC and other modern platforms. After Sonic Forces, or even before Sonic Forces, development's gonna start slowing down again with the increasing demand of the PS4 and Xbone, so in addition to releasing quality spin-off and 2D games, it would just be a nice reassurance to have a backlog of games ready for people to buy at any time on the most recent systems. Beyond that, however, at last, we're all caught up. Perhaps at this point, Sonic Team would have released a second game in the 8th generation, and a new 2D game would be available for players on the Nintendo Switch as well, but the contents of which are all completely foreign. After that exhausting journey, what is the overall takeaway? Of course, it's all based on my opinion and thought process after studying this series for years, but I really tried to illustrate what it may look like if Sonic were just to adhere to some healthier guidelines. Don't rush games. Make timeless art, not dated responses. Don't evade, evolve. And you know what? Sure, maybe this is too idealistic. Maybe this or something like this could never have happened and this whole video is for nothing. Sure, I'll bet that even if everything happened exactly as I envisioned it, problems would still arise. I'm not saying it's perfect, and I'm not even trying to be some genius by saying that I know how to fix everything. I'm better than Sega. It's mainly just for fun, as nothing can really come of it. But, by the same token, was our outcome inevitable? No. No way. Sonic, as a brand, has made so many mistakes that would kill almost any other series. You can't tell me it's in the series' DNA or it's a product of its time that could never have lasted. Get out of here. Sonic continues to live because people care. It's a miracle, but it's a miracle that people make happen. If this is what it is right now, if it's still technically alive and kicking, imagine the potential of what it can be. Sonic can be a normal video game series and still sell. Something that, yes, has its own flaws that make it man-made, but can walk into a room and not immediately be laughed off the site. I make this video not to say how terrible this series is. I'm not here to belittle its achievements when I picture a world where it reaches the potential I see. If anything, I'm here to say that Sonic is worth so much to me because the good it accomplishes is very important, and I wish it could be seen that way by everybody. Well, most people. Understandably, some may be upset by what I value in this discussion. You may not like the idea that I believe Sega organically building from their pillars in the early 2000s would be for everyone's best interest. Unfortunately, this conversation is rooted in the society we have right now, a fandom environment that I'm tired of. If we constantly, and I do mean with no ifs, ands, or buts, constantly had great things to look forward to with this series, we would have so many better things to talk about. We would not be going on Twitter every single day to discuss which game had the best eyes. We would not have to have debates on how very simple characters are supposed to be portrayed in even the tiniest of mediums. The series would not be carried by supplemental avenues like memes, mobile apps, comics, or free YouTube cartoons. Things like the amazing Sonic 30th Anniversary Symphony would happen more often because Sonic would be a name most people unironically want to see. Sonic would be something critics take seriously, something they're bringing up in their Game of the Year debates. And certainly, we would not have to stretch the truth about how great the series is doing if the truth was too good to be stretched. I'm just weary of all the baggage that comes from the origin point that is Sega's mismanagement. The dumb rules that apply only to this series, the tribalism within the fanbase, and honestly, the willful acceptance and ignorance. The staggering amount of people who will tell you that these discussions should just not be had, because the series has been this way for so long that you just gotta universally love or hate it. It's part of Sonic's identity, man. The fact that it is an irrational roller coaster, no. This dumb blue hedgehog matters to people enough that they want to say what they feel is important rather than just sit on the fence and regurgitate the obvious. It's important to me that we recognize the nuances of the series' history, no matter what age we're looking at, lest we end up the raging blowhards that we don't want Sega to cater games to. Before I finally cut it off here, there's an article that I remember all too well and think about often when regarding everything that's currently going on with Sonic. An article from Polygon published on February 8th, 2016, titled Sonic's Long, Great, Rocky History. I want to share an excerpt from this with you because it really is emblematic of everything I'm talking about today. This was what Takashi Iizuka said following Sonic Boom: Rise of Lyric. When you buy a Sonic game, we want you to see that Sega logo on the package and know that you're getting a great experience. Ideally, I want Sonic to be a character loved both by people who play games and by those who don't. He would then go on to say, though the character won't change, we do think that the games should always be open to evolving and constantly improving themselves. We use our Sonic Team logo as a brand for those titles we feel confident in, and though Sonic has evolved and changed much in terms of gameplay as we found what worked best, we want to keep creating good games so that Sonic Team's logo will always stand as a mark of quality. So let me ask you, imaginary apparition Izuka, is Sonic Forces a game your team felt confident in? Was that really just seen as this pinnacle of Sonic's evolution, a game of the ages, a great game for people of all kinds? If not, and I assume not, did Sega put pressure on you to make the game what it was, potentially even launching it before Sonic Team could feel that their mark of quality was on it? If so, am I looking at that Sega logo on the package and thinking, God damn, I know I'm getting a great experience? No, I'm not. But with absolute certainty, I think that's such an admirable sentiment to have. What I made this video for was that exact quote. To just let go of our current attachments and imagine a world where such a statement is true. It's about grasping what I believe is the true identity of Sonic, and that is a movable confidence, a lack of fear that would drive a team to fold on their fiery vision. If Sega hadn't made such hasty decisions with this franchise, a childlike part of me still believes that it would be my overall favorite video game series, and I wouldn't have to do anything to justify it. I guess the reason why I thought this video might have a purpose, though, is that it still can be. I know I said at the start that this wasn't meant to be a how to fix the current state of a series video, but the franchise is not in a position where it's too late. It's no coincidence that we always see glimpses of that, with passionate efforts to liven it up here and there, dancing around the core problem of priority misplacement. While I think I've outlined why it would be ideal, we don't need time travel, because the truth is this: the only way to break free is to break the mold. And after all, in 1991, isn't that what Sonic the Hedgehog was created to do?